At number 10, some background. The Mughal dynasty in India was founded by Babur, a descendant of the one, the only, Genghis Khan and Tamerlane. After he defeated a sultan of Delhi named Ibrahim Lodi in 1526, Babur was the first step in the Mughal dynasty that would last for over 3 centuries. To say that the empire was immense is an understatement. The empire ruled over 103 million people, probably even more. The Mughals were rooted in Muslim beliefs and were noted for their well-organized government and cultural sophistication. Many of the rulers tried to integrate the Hindus and Muslims under one state, but as we will find out from this list, it was not an easy thing to do, which ended up causing a lot of strife. Many rulers of the empire flip-flopped back and forth between being merciful and tyrannical towards the Hindus, adding to centuries of oppression. At number 9, blinded. Humayun was set to inherit the throne from his father, much to the jealousy of his brothers. He was 23 when he ascended the throne in 1530 after the death of his father. His brothers reigned over different fiefs, but none of them were satisfied unless they had the crown. He also wasn't the best ruler. Humayun was sent into exile for 15 years after he was overthrown by one of his father's generals, Sher Shah. Humayun fled and eventually ended up in Persia, where he built back up an army through his partnership with the Shah. Slowly he took back his land, facing his own brothers who were constantly scheming against him. But Babur, his father, made him promise that he would never lay a hand on his brothers. But his brother Kamran continued to threaten him, and one instance while defending a fort turned on the innocents trapped inside and took their lives viciously. Kamran, not a good dude. Something needed to be done. He eventually catches his scheming brothers, blinds his brother Kamran, and chains his brother Askari. A little messed up, but not bad for war. Before I carry on with the rest of the video, make sure you guys are subscribed to the channel and maybe consider leaving a like on this video if you're enjoying it so far. At number 8, Akbar. Humayun continued to deal with the competition of his brothers until finally his reign came to an end, but not in the way that you would expect. He was carrying a bunch of books up some stairs and he accidentally fell, leading to a lethal head injury. His 13-year-old son Akbar had to inherit the throne. Akbar would later become known as the Great, but that doesn't mean that he didn't do some questionable things. Where his father failed to conquer, Akbar swept through. But just like his father, he encountered jealousy and dangerous ambition in the dark corners of his reign. In Delhi, an attempt to assassinate him was made, the bowman nearly missing him. Who was behind it? The slave of a nobleman who recently tried to start a rebellion. But the plot thickens. Akbar's foster brother's mother had further designs to establish power for herself through her son, Adam Khan. Khan actually ended up taking the life of Akbar's foster father, which led to Akbar throwing him down the stairs and therefore killing him. The mother died 40 days later due to grief. Grief over her son or the loss of power? Who knows? At number 7, Jahangir. So this guy was super impatient to become the ruler and was getting tired of Daddy Akbar taking his time. So he revolted. Damn, this court honestly was just rife with rebellion. They never got tired of it. In 1599, while his father was otherwise engaged and away from the palace, Prince Salim led a revolt. During the revolt, he even skinned a man alive. Akbar was pissed about this and wrote to his son and said, quote, "I have never skinned a bird alive in my life, and you have treated a human being in this manner." Jahangir then went on to conspire against a close advisor of his father named Abul Fazl, whom Jahangir killed in a small battle. Despite Akbar being devastated at his son's behavior, he was the only male heir left to inherit, so on Akbar's deathbed he forgave his son and implored the nobles to recognize him as a leader. At number 6, sowed to an ox. Now Jahangir was emperor, but the trouble didn't stop there. I saw some sources recognize him as a somewhat benevolent figure, while others said that he was the exact opposite. He was pretty brutal, and his first task was crushing a rebellion against that which his own son began. Apple, not far from the tree. He was traveling to Lahore when he came across two nobles who were sympathetic to his son's cause, so he decided to punish them in a very peculiar and violent way. He ordered that one be sewed to the skin of an ass and the other to an ox. Now that is messed up. When he got to Lahore to face the rebels, he crushed them and blinded his own son as punishment. A ruler couldn't have any impediments, so therefore his son could no longer pursue the role. Then he hung his son's followers outside of Taxali Gate. Yeah, so even within the confines of war, this guy had some pretty messed up ideas. At number 5, sucking toes. The British royal family are considered celebrities. I mean, with the amount of time people spend obsessing about their every move, I'd say that they're 10 times more famous than the Kardashians. They don't need their own reality show for people to keep up with them. People just do it. With this obsession with the royals obviously comes paparazzi trying to get the latest scoop on members of the family and what they do in their spare time, as well as who they're canoodling with. This was how Sarah Ferguson was exposed for seeing other men shortly after she and Prince Andrew separated. Sarah was photographed topless on a beach with a man named John Bryan, and it could have just been a juicy story by itself, but things got weird when pictures were published showing the man sucking on Sarah's toes. This again wasn't a good look for the royals, and the queen was pretty mad about the whole situation, but I'd like to look at the bright side of this. Think that this John Bryan guy had a pretty good time throughout all this. I mean, he got to suck royal toes and be published in the newspaper. Sounds like a pretty lit time for him.
Number 4, party time. British royals are people of high esteem, morals, and cut from a higher quality of cloth. So when members of the royal family are seen partying too hard, well, it's a bad look. Prince George, Duke of Kent, was one such royal. He became known for spending his evenings in the best hotels and ballrooms that money could buy, even sometimes wandering into venues that were a tad tawdry even by today's standards. What's more interesting than that is the prince living the life of a frat boy is that his promiscuous relationship with not only just women, but men as well. Add in substance abuse issues that would make Charlie Sheen blush, and you've got yourself one wild prince. Yet again, there's some private letters that seem to support such wild accusations. Unfortunately, he passed away in a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery, and the royal family is suspected of having a hand. Foreshadowing much?
At number 3, the milkman's son. By far the most scandalous royal relationship of modern times was without a doubt Prince Charles and Princess Diana's marriage. We all know how messy their relationship was with the love triangle, the affairs, and Diana's confessions of how tough it was to be married to Charles. But one of the other pretty juicy secret scandals that surrounded the couple was the speculation that the couple's youngest son, Prince Harry, wasn't even Prince Charles's biological kid. In a tell-all interview with Princess Diana in 1995, she admitted to having had a 5-year-long affair with a military man named James Hewitt. After Diana's passing, people started speculating that perhaps this James character was actually Harry's biological dad. I mean, when you take a side-by-side look at James and Harry, their resemblance is pretty uncanny. James denied all allegations, and the royal family did the same, but this still remains one of those royal secrets that I'm sure everyone believes but just won't admit.
Number 2, stepbro? Yeah, I know it's gross, but the truth of the matter is none of us would be here if it wasn't for a little inbreeding. Royals just tend to turn that dial up to 11. Back in ye olde times, bloodlines had to be maintained, and the only way to keep them pure was to marry cousins and have children. Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip are both related to Queen Victoria, but the crazy bus doesn't stop here. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were first cousins, and they had 9 children together. This is a tradition that all royal families practice. Of course, marriage back then was more of a business decision or a political one. It's why certain distant cousins end up ruling different monarchies and empires. Sure, I get it. Why cross the street when you can cross the hall? But at some point, you gotta run out of cousins. Let's just be glad this practice is of the past and stays in the past.
At number 1, long lost family. The royal family is known for trying to make themselves look perfect in the eyes of the public. They are always trying to look poised and put together and without flaws, but this effort also comes with its dark side, and there's a dark royal secret that just shows the lengths that they have gone to make people think that they are all just perfect people of society. It turns out that the queen had secret cousins that very few people knew about. The royal family and everyone adjacent are very well-known people, so how did we not know about the queen's cousins? Well, that's because they were essentially shunned and shipped off elsewhere because of their mental states. Back in the 1940s, mental disabilities were not very understood and were often seen as embarrassing for the families of the people who had whatever disability. The royal family thought that these cousins, Nerissa and Catherine, were too embarrassing for the royal family to keep around, so they had them incarcerated in a mental institution, and they remained there for the rest of their lives, cut off from the rest of the royal family. It is said that no members of the family ever came to visit them. Now that is not a way to treat family.
Number 10. What's yours is mine. Maintaining a dynasty and trying to rule over a people is hard. Many people have done it in the past, but if you notice, there isn't that many kingdoms left. So, it's no surprise that in Egypt, one of the largest and most successful civilizations of the ancient world and of all time, had some political strife. Berenice III had lost her husband Ptolemy, and she was doing her best to maintain power. In some serious Alabama energy, Ptolemy XI was made king, a stepson and half-brother. The man wanted it all to himself, and can you blame him? I mean, look at the pyramids. Nice, I'd want him too. He promptly unalived his new queen because power moves. Some people didn't like this, and in some form of poetic justice, he was unalived. By the people. What's the lesson in this one? Maybe that you can't trust your strange, closely knit inbred family members? I'm not sure, honestly, but it's just messed up. Number 9. Double Trouble. This one isn't exactly about a king removing a queen like his wife, but it is about kings ceasing the life of their queen, more specifically their mother. Clyricus and Oxythris were the sons of Amistris, a woman handed off in marriage by the mad lad Macedonian himself, Alexander the Great. Well, like a lot of ye olde history, there was some power struggles. A power vacuum had been created in the death of Dionysus. You'd think that wouldn't happen over and over again, but you'll find that a lot in history. The power struggle was solved, and eventually Amistris retired and remarried. Named a town after herself. Things were okay for Amistris. Things were good. But one day her sons came to visit and noticed the Mon looked a little thirsty. So they drowned her in a river in a power grab that pretty much immediately backfired, as they too were unalived by the next guy in line. Pretty similar to the last story, but that's history, isn't it? Number 8. One too many. Sometimes when you're king, you're gonna have more than one wife that's 6 feet under. It's just how it goes sometimes. However, I believe there is no better example of this than Afzal Khan, whose actions were so egregious that I did a literal double take after learning about what this king had done. See, Afzal didn't just unalive one wife or a couple like history's favorite King Henry VIII. No, my busy bees. He is responsible for the termination of 63 wives, not wives. I'm not sure what kind of guy would make that kind of mistake. In fear of losing them to an invader who treated women slightly better, he had his soldiers give them a tall glass of drowning. Those who tried to escape were cut down without mercy. Yeah, I lived next door to the chief. He invited me in for a cup of tea. I sat down and he said, "That ain't it." You know something's messed up if I'm overusing that joke. Number 7. 20 years of therapy. Elizabeth of Bosnia was a very unpopular queen, and unfortunately had to often defend her throne with violence. As it turns out, this did not bode well. Many people wanted revenge, and honestly, just to take her position of power. Elizabeth, understanding perhaps her times might be numbered, was going to try everything she could to keep her bloodline in power. The passing of her king husband only made things worse. In her attempts to escape the impending doom, she was captured and imprisoned by her new owners. She was eventually released. Oh, did I say released? I meant as punishment she was strangled in front of her daughter. Now, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm more of a bumbling fool, but that just can't be healthy for you. Emotional damage! Number 6. Bad divorce. Pedro of Castile was doing as the European monarchs do. Sometimes you gotta marry for alliances. Sure, it makes sense. Your kingdom is much less likely to get steamrolled by a larger kingdom if you have an alliance with a fellow kingdom or with a bigger one itself. Pedro of Castile, he married a young Blanche of Bourbon so France and Spain could just seem just a wee bit more snug. But Pedro just wasn't having it. What he was having instead was a mistress named Maria. So instead of enduring a loveless marriage, he had poor Blanche locked away in a tower. Just like Sleeping Beauty. Except a handsome prince wasn't coming to rescue this damsel in distress, but a man with a black hood and a sharpened axe, as Pedro had her unalived. I was gonna make a joke about Rapunzel and let down some hair so she could make an escape, but I mean, that's just awful, really. I mean, imagine being locked up in a tower for a long time. Sure, I love the indoors, but you gotta let me out at some point, Chief. Do you think I get a food delivery app up in that tower? Maybe.
Number 5. King Henry II. This is a quote that people believe was Nostradamus predicting the death of King Henry II, who actually was a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be scary. Hey, how do I tell you this? Well, at one point Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible Henry, King of France. Unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death at the age of 40. In the summer of 1559, a terrible jousting accident went awry and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I told you it because many think that Nostradamus predicted this. The jousting incident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and his skull by one of his young soldiers, and the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one." Yeah, he's jousting and then the eye, and then it happened. That sucks. Number 4, Prince Charles the Vampire. Now, some of these theories, yeah, they're a bit out there. I didn't make them up. I wish I did, but I didn't. Some believers out there actually think Prince Charles is a vampire, a blood-sucking, flying, turning into a bat-looking vampire. I don't know. Why? Because Prince Charles is related to Vlad the Impaler. You know, that 15th century ruler who inspired the story of Dracula in Transylvania, who we're all pretty sure was a vampire. Now, it's a fun theory that went about, but Prince Charles having a piece of Romania is definitely helping out this case. We kind of believe this. The prince has been conserving forests and he even got property over there, so maybe he's a vampire, maybe not. Maybe he just likes property and castles. And Vlad the Impaler. I heard he's a great lad. A great Vlad. Number 3, shapeshifters. Awesome. I'm not actually Taylor, I'm someone else pretending to be. That's cool. That's why I'm so energetic today. This next theory I wish I could claim for my own again, but it was actually former BBC presenter David Icke. He takes the cake himself. Here we go. He has since revealed himself as a conspiracy theorist, and one that surrounds the royal family had me stunned. Icke and quite a few others claim that the royal family is part of the Illuminati. Yeah, and then all of them earn their power because their human ancestor mated with reptilian aliens. They were clapping alien reptilians. That's how they became royals. That's the trick. You gotta clap some reptilian alien. David says the theory actually explains why royal families are obsessed with keeping their bloodlines clean with other royals. And you know, incest. But the biggest what the part of all this has to be when David told the public that he knows people who have seen royal family members change into reptiles and then back into human form again. Number 2, leaked letters. We'll end with some recent leaked letters. We love those, we love some gossip. We mentioned Princess Diana, well, we've got more stuff, we've got more tea. In May 2018, the royal wedding, it was thought at the time that Meghan's father was absent because of a heart attack that he suffered days before. But a year or so later, it's revealed that Thomas Markle and the new Duchess weren't as close. There was some drama, there was some beef going on in the family. Thomas spoke out against his own daughter. There was a scandal where Meghan spoke to Oprah, the tell-all that we all watched, and Meghan actually said to her father that if you tell me the truth about what happened, about working with paparazzi, then we can help and get through it. But he wasn't able to do that, and that for me has really resonated. Yeah, if my dad was working with paparazzi, showing them private letters as well, just for clout, I'd be upset too. As if my dad can't even open his iPad without me, let alone leak my letters. Number 1, personal sheet changer. I can't tell if this is the worst thing ever or the best, but it's kept me laughing for months now. Royals have been sweating constantly about other people trying to, you know, take them out, right? It's a scary job. Everyone wants to attack you. I mentioned Boyd Jones on here a few times, that guy that stalked the Queen. It's terrifying. People are terrifying. Boyd Jones would go through the Queen's drawers and, you know, big ooh. So historically, the royal family would try their best to anticipate any and all attacks. Be as safe as you can be, right? Of course. Like the kissing sheets, for example. Oh, have you heard about these kissing sheets, this royal position? A great deal of monarchs hired taste testers to make sure nobody poisoned them, that's normal. But they also had a guy who would get tucked in the king's sheets. I would much rather have the latter, know what I mean? King Henry VIII hired somebody to make sure the bed wasn't poisoned. So you were required to make the king's bed every morning, but you also had to rub all the sheets down everywhere before bedtime. You'd have to kiss the bed sheets to make sure they weren't poisoned. Yeah, sleep tight. All safe here, boss. Here we go. Don't mind the old medieval dad breath all over your pillows. You're safe for the night. That's so gross. I can't even sleep in a hotel sometimes, let alone some dude. Mwah, 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 mwah. Mwah, mwah. I'm like, what are you doing? Get this guy out of here. Why is he kissing my bed? Clothes as well. That was also touched. Maybe not kissed, but it was for sure touched. Guys wearing my clothes in my bed, kissing my sheets? No way. I think I'd rather get poisoned. Take my jeans off. Get out of there.
Number 10, moving in. I don't know about you guys, but when I think of Old Blighty, I think of royal prestige. London and Buckingham Palace. After all, that's what a queen needs. You gotta have a palace. Where's my palace? Although most people think of the queen living in Buckingham Palace, Queen Victoria was the first of the royal family to do so. I'm not royalty, but I wouldn't mind crashing a few days there. Nice big place, servants, probably all you can eat. Man, she had it good. All that's missing is Wi-Fi. Move over, Your Royal Highness, I'm moving in. Just gotta get my collection of Sailor Moon memorabilia. Number 9, Queen Jeans. No, not a nice pair of royal genes. I'm talking about DNA and hereditary genes. I've mentioned a few times on this channel how the royal family may or may not have been inbreeding. Okay, who am I kidding? There was a lot of inbreeding going on. Sisters, brothers, mothers, fathers, cousins, and of course, hey step bro. Now, as lovely as that seems to some, unfortunately, crossing the hall to reproduce can have ill effects, as inbreeding is known to have complications with birth and their offspring. Well, Queen Victoria may have been the first carrier of hemophilia B, a blood clotting disease. While not having it herself, it's thought she passed it down through royals related all throughout Europe. Tsar Nicholas II's son comes to mind. However, I feel like if we told the royals why people were contracting certain illnesses, they would still do what they want anyway. So I'll just close the door. You guys can go ahead and do what you're gonna do. Number 8, breaking tradition. For men in Western culture, it has been a long time of bending the knee to propose to the woman that you love, or so wish to swoon. Tammy Lynn, I don't got much, but I know I got this ring I found behind a Chuck E. Cheese. So what I would like to do is I Jim Bob Billy Abernathy am asking for your hand in marriage. So romantic. Anyway, bad jokes aside, you'd be wrong in thinking that's how it went for Old Blighty. When the young monarch met her cousin, Albert, the love juices were flowing. She knew she was gonna have to lock him in and propose to him before he could get the chance. They were shortly married soon after, and as stated in her diaries, it seemed that the couple was truly in love, which for royals is kind of rare. Even today, it's usually men who propose to ladies, but all I'm gonna say is, ladies, I'm 300 pounds of twisted steel and sex appeal, and I put the toothpaste lid back on after brushing my teeth, so, Number 7, did you miss me? Queen Victoria was a leader. She held a lot of power, and that means people sometimes got a little crazy and wanted to remove her from such power. So for Queen Victoria, it should be no surprise however uncouth it was, but she had multiple assassination attempts on her life. A lot of which were people firing shots at her carriage for some reason with a pistol. And a lot of these attempts leading people to being declared insane. And one specific amateur who tried multiple times to end the royal and failed every time. 8 times to be specific. I feel like after the first 4 times when the guard saw this guy approach, it was like, oh, man, this guy again. Oh brother, this guy stinks! Anyway, all attempts to end her life failed, and she became the 2nd longest reigning queen, next to Queen Elizabeth of course. Number 6. Oh Christmas tree, oh Christmas tree. I was honestly shooketh when I learned this, but you know that thing a lot of people do around the holiday season where they get a big green tree and they like decorate it because of the holiday called like Christmas? You might have heard of it. Yeah, I've never heard of it either. Bad jokes aside, the queen and her husband may have popularized the Christmas tradition of decorating the tree after sending trees to local schools and army barracks. An image of the family decorating the tree was also published that Christmas. I wonder if they popularized any other traditions as well, like your aunt drinking too much wine, and that one uncle, no matter how many times he's told, says something at the dinner table that would have him sitting in HR so fast that, well, he'd be sitting in the HR office for saying something like that in public. Everyone's got an uncle like that.
Now for the legal obligation to be taken to the grave. Working for the pharaoh could be pretty lit as long as it wasn't forced captivity. If you were hired staff for arts, music, foods, hygiene, whatever, you'd be paid spectacularly, housed and fed well. Overall, you had a good go of it. Until there comes a day where every pharaoh gets mauled by a hippo and has to take a dust nap. Because of their strong belief in the afterlife, Egyptians were dedicated to ensuring that they carried the things they would need into said afterlife. Tools, cooking utensils, makeup, a brush, a long narrow glass bottle filled with buzzing bees. I see you, Cleopatra. In the case of pharaohs, who were considered to be the most important people alive, they required their workers, enslaved or contracted, in their afterlife if they were to continue living lives of comfort and luxury even after death. Many other individuals of high rank in ancient Egypt who had staffing would also often be buried with their workers the same as pharaohs, treated as if they were moving into a new house with their masters. And this was the rules. You were a servant, you were expected to go quietly, willingly. Hell, they wanted you to be so excited you practically threw yourself in the tomb and begged them to gonna bury in. Before any of the pharaohs that are the most famous today came into power, however, the tradition underwent a change. Obviously, burying people in there is pretty cruel, and after a while people got real sick of having to die when the pharaoh does. However, the pharaoh still requires servants in the afterlife to perform various menial tasks for them and maintain their palace. This led to the introduction of Shabti, tiny carved figures that were placed within the tombs of the pharaohs. They're shaped like small mummies, and each of them had special details carved into them on what jobs and tasks they would have in the afterlife. Imagine pointing at a fish and going, "Hey, look, a fish," and its response is, "That is Lord Fish to you." Quite the case with carp, of all creature, literally the dirtiest little bottom feeders there are. They eat just about anything, thus earning their meme status as a garbage fish. However, carp, like koi, can be fortunate and seen as good luck. In fact, talking about carp the way I just did could get you in massive trouble during the Tang Dynasty, because carp has the same pronunciation as the Tang Emperor's last name, Li. According to the Miscellanea of Yuyang, which is a record of legends, folk customs, and herbal remedies in the Tang Dynasty, carp had to be referred to as Lord Red Carp to show respect to the imperial family. Also, those who happen to catch carp should relieve the fish immediately. It's not acceptable to eat them, and those who sell them will be flogged 60 times. However, like all legal provisions, this law was only as good as its enforcement, and judging by the amount of Tang poets who wrote about catching and eating carp without any record of punishment, seems like this law was very loose. Emperor Renzong of the Yuan Dynasty had a similar idea as his Tang predecessors. The Yuan Dynasty historian Yang Yu recorded in historical notes that during the Renzong reign, people in the capital were not allowed to hold chickens upside down. Offenders would be convicted, probably because the emperor's zodiac sign was a chicken. Now it's China's shorty selection system in the Forbidden City. Inside the Forbidden City, most women were maids and servants, but there were the notorious concubines. Their task was to bear children to the emperor, as many as he could father, because that's what he was focusing on when walking into a harem of women who couldn't say no to him and were also the baddest biddies the empire had to offer. Anyways, women were selected for the court as early as the Jin Dynasty, and the aesthetic selection criteria did range from emperor to emperor. According to law, all young unmarried women went through the selection process. Only girls who were married or had a certified physical disability or physical deformity were exempt. Whenever selection time rolled around, the Board of Revenue sent notices to the officials in the capital and the provincial garrisons to enlist the help of the clan heads. The banner officials then submitted a list of all available females to the commander's headquarters, and they set the date. During the Qing Dynasty, girls were brought on the appointed day to the Shenwu Gate of the Forbidden City for inspection. They'd be accompanied by their parents, nearest relatives, together with their clan heads or local officials. Social background was actually no barrier, and many emperors chose concubines from the general public. The empress was the one exception. She had to be for a high-ranking official. Less than 100 candidates would be selected to spend the nights with women who specialize in training and managing maids. Candidates' bodies were inspected for infections, body hair, body odor. Think of that beginning scene in Mulan, as stereotypical as that is to say. They advanced through 2 more levels of concubine boot camp, weeding out the weak, America's Next Top Model style, and finally, the selected few would take their lives as easy-baked baby ovens. Womp womp. Next. Imagine someone wants to make sure you like the food, so they find a way to measure your enjoyment. Literally measure it. Like, get on a scale, big boy, it's time for your weigh-in. Absolutely crazy. So listen to this. According to a 2018 Grazia Daily article with the representative of British Windsor family, before and after Christmas dinner, everyone gets weighed. Ho ho ho, jolly occasion. The weird tradition apparently dates back to King Edward VII's reign in the early 1900s. His Majesty was apparently concerned about the people's health and whether or not they're eating well enough on Christmas. So, each person attending this dinner is required to get weighed on a pair of antique scales both before and after eating. If they gain in weight, it signals they truly enjoyed themselves at the table and the king did his job. Oh yeah, and you are obligated to know how much you weigh too before and after, so don't think you can ceiling stare your way through this one. The tradition was depicted in a scene in the 2021 film Spencer, in which Princess Diana, played by Kristen Stewart, understandably tweaks a little and expresses her distaste over the entire debacle. Pop off as usual, Princess D. Some other fun royal Christmas activities are the guests are expected to enter the room in order of seniority, whatever the hell that means, and wear paper hats even though the queen doesn't have to wear one. And last but not least, rules are meant to be broken. Like all monarchies, Spain does have its royal protocols, and they regulate the normal stuff, how you talk, walk, dress, the elegance in which you hold your regal frame. Spain has these royal protocols alright, and we know that because Queen Letizia is constantly making headlines for breaking them flagrantly and with a smirk ever since her husband was crowned. In 2014, royal watchers gasped when she wore a little black dress with a short skirt that was see-through all the way up to her mid-thigh. Conservative royals frowned that when she wore a sleeveless dress to a formal dinner. She wears pants and shorts and sweatpants. She forgoes traditional shawls and enormous hair cones for Brandy Melville and cute pony ponytails with highlights. Stylistically, the previously divorced commoner and former journalist, which I have to add because you know that was hella drama when she was made queen, is basically the opposite of her mother-in-law, who's now Spain's former queen, Sofia. Letizia probably takes extra delight in flaunting their differences since the two hate each other with a passion and have gotten in shouting matches in public. Trust Letizia to put the queen in queen.
Not so British after all. If you're like me, then you're most likely not gonna be royalty. Although being a prince would be pretty cool, I just don't have the pure bloodline to be royalty, but neither does the Queen of England. When you think of old Blighty and her royal throne, you think of pure British descent, but you'd be wrong. The House of Windsor is actually Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, which, if you couldn't tell, doesn't exactly scream tea and crumpets. The German-sounding name became an issue in the early 20th century due to the First World War breaking out against two-time war loser Germany. Britain needing to inspire its citizens to defeat Germany, which at the time it was really anyone's game, so to help inspire the people, King George V changed the name to Windsor. After all, it's kinda difficult to fight someone when you have more in common than differences. Not to mention that there were a lot of Germanic influences around, so really, it was a bad look and a great marketing decision.
At number 9, Charles the Tampon? Yeah, we're getting weird. Relationships are kind of weird. I mean, they can be great, don't get me wrong, but they have a weird side too. Every couple is different and they have their thing. Some have a show that they like to watch together, others have their songs, and some have little sayings that they've come up with. But those are the more tame quirks that some couples have. Others, however, can get very bizarre, but many of them probably can't add up to the strange things that have been said between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. As we all know, Prince Charles was first married to Princess Diana, and it's no secret that they had a pretty tough relationship. Theirs was certainly not a happy marriage, and they each had their own affairs with other people while they were married. During their marriage, Charles was still pretty hung up on Camilla, the woman he was told he couldn't have, and who was also married to someone else. This minor obstacle, however, didn't stop them from getting freaky, at least over the phone. In 1992, the year that Charles and Diana announced their separation, a steamy phone conversation between Charles and Camilla was leaked, and it was super weird. In the call, Charles was simping like no other, saying things like how he wished he could live in Camilla's pants as a pair of panties, and even expressed his desire to be Camilla's tampon. Like, what? Charles, stop it. Ew. This leak became a scandal called Tampon Gate, and as you can imagine, this wasn't good for the royals. But I guess it still kind of worked out for Charles, since after all that he finally got the girl he wanted and perhaps got to live out his dream of being a box of Tampax or something. I don't know. I really don't want that mental image. Moving on.
Number 8. Comrade Cousin? King George V and Tsar Nicholas II were rulers of vast empires in the early 20th century. You'd think the similarities between these two monarchs end there, but in reality, these two royal men were much closer than the public thought. Georgie and Nicky were first cousins. That's right, first cousins. Even though their respected empires were culturally different and separated by hundreds of miles, the two men were immediate family. Looking at images of the royals together doesn't require a DNA test to understand that they're related. They look identical and could easily be mistaken for twins. Unfortunately for Nicholas, when the Russian Revolution was in full swing, the Romanov family went into isolation after Nicholas abdicated his throne. While there were attempts to thwart the coup. Nicky's cousin wasn't the best aid. Just goes to show you that sometimes you can't rely on a guy who looks exactly like you because royalty has pretty messed up bloodlines.
At number 7, killer date. What is the worst date that you've ever been on? What kinds of weird people have you met through your dating history? I'm sure there are some pretty wild and crazy stories out there, but I'm guessing that very few of them would even come close to the insane dating story from Princess Beatrice and how she literally dated a killer. In 2006, when Princess Beatrice was 17 years old, she got into a relationship with an American playboy named Paolo Luzzo. Paolo was an arguably shady guy, judging by the fact that he was arrested on a manslaughter charge before getting with Beatrice. Paolo was accused of ending the life of 19-year-old Jonathan Duchalier after beating the guy to death. Yeah, what a catch, right? Shockingly, Paolo's charges were reduced to a less severe charge, and he still got to date a princess after all of this. He even broke his probation to go on a trip to the French Alps with Princess Beatrice. How he finessed life so hard, I have no idea, but either way, their relationship only lasted a short amount of time. I can't say it's a good look for a member of the royal family to be seen with someone with such a dark past.
Number 6. The Princess. The tragic loss of Princess Diana affected not only the UK but people around the globe. She was known for her courage and her willingness to help those in need. and had the nerve to speak her mind. Her shocking demise isn't met without controversy. In fact, it may be the biggest controversy of the royal family. There is some evidence that points in the direction that the royal family was behind her death. Diana had proclaimed to her guards that her car was having issues, and even stated in a private letter to her butler that she had some reasonable fear that her life was in danger. In a nutshell, the royal family disapproved of the princess's new lover, even though Charles had clearly been up to no good himself. So in order for Charles to remarry and stop the gutter storm and the tabloids that Diana was going to create, they maybe sort of organized the accident that did end her life. Well, good thing that's over, and after this there won't be any more controversy for the family, right?
Number 5. The bedchamber crisis. May 1839, the bedchamber crisis happened when Whig politician Lord Melbourne resigned as Prime Minister. This is a big deal because it was only a couple years right after Victoria became Queen. So again, timing here was just not ideal. The first Prime Minister, Whig politician, Lord Melbourne, was close with Victoria originally. He actually convinced Victoria to appoint a good amount of her ladies in waiting. So he had power over her, but it was a mutual agreement. It wasn't like, you know, the other power that she had her whole life. They were homies. They were homies, I said in a video about Victoria. So in 1839, when Melbourne resigned, Tory Robert Peel came in to be Prime Minister, and he requested that Victoria dismiss these ladies in waiting and then replace them with Tory ladies. Well, since Victoria was an OG and these were her only real friends if there was such a thing growing up, she said no. So of course she was criticized for such a choice. Prince Albert luckily was able to have some of her ladies resign voluntarily, so things smoothed over eventually, but the Queen honestly never got a break, even on the happiest days, like number 4, her engagement. The life of Queen Victoria wasn't anything like a fairy tale, obviously, as I've said anything so far. So when you think about the royal family, at least when I was younger, I thought being a queen or king was just eating chocolate all day and then you attend galas. Yeah, you just eat yummy foods, wear a crown, look cute, and then go to the ball. No, not quite. That's not really how it's like at all. Victoria had to do everything herself. She even had to propose to Prince Albert. It's royal tradition that nobody shall propose to a reigning monarch, so in October 1839, Victoria had to ask Albert for his hand in marriage. It all started when the pair were 17 years old. Victoria met the young prince, of course, at Kensington Palace. They were put together because Victoria's uncle felt like this could be beneficial down the road. They were first cousins, now they're getting married, which sounds bizarre, but as you've seen on this channel before, with royalty and stuff, it's quite common. Number 3, first marriage. The wedding of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert happened in St. James Palace Chapel on February 10th, 1840. This was a big deal because it was the first time a ruling queen was getting married. This hadn't happened in 286 years. The last marriage of a reigning queen was in 1554, and that was Queen Mary I. Queen Victoria had 12 bridesmaids, wore white, had a lovely dress, thing was like 18 feet long, it was gorgeous. But it must have been so overwhelming for the young queen because she was isolated for her entire life, and then all of a sudden what? You're getting married outside at 20 in front of all these crowds? After the wedding, Queen Victoria's head was hurting. It was probably so stressful, but she still had the time of her life. She wrote this in her diary after her wedding. She wrote, "I never spent such an evening. My dearest, dear Albert. His excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to have felt before. He clasped me in his arms and we kissed each other again and again. His beauty, his sweetness, and gentleness, really, how can I ever be thankful enough to have such a husband? To be called by names of tenderness I've never yet heard used to me before was bliss beyond belief. Oh, this was the happiest day of my life." Yeah, when you're locked up and you have a horrible duchess watching your every move, this day probably sounds like a nice break. A well-deserved break, I'd say. Eat all the cake you can have. Number 2, attacks. Being the queen and all, a security team is always needed. And during her reign, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. The first attack was back in 1840. An 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford fired towards the queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, he was actually found not guilty due to insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. And then again in 1842, 1849, and 1872, attempt after attempt after attempt. But at one point, things were creepy and almost worse. Number 1, Boy Jones. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened here at all, I saved it for last because it's very creepy. It's mind-blowing in a horrible way. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841. His name was Edward Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once. Just some Assassin's Creed going on here. Guy just knows a route I guess. That's so scary. He would break in and he would hide under the queen's sofa. He would sit on her throne, and one of the worst things ever, he would go through her drawers. Figuratively and literally. Like, he would go and he would steal her clothes until eventually, and thankfully, the guy got caught. Kicking off our list at number 10, Princess Diana. We'll start with a tragedy right off the gate. Here we go. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, he straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla right before his divorce from his first wife, Princess Diana. So, in turn, Princess Diana addressed that relationship and what exactly happened. During that famous 1995 interview with BBC, she couldn't have said it better if I'm being honest myself. Diana said, very confidently, "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That's a Princess Diana roast, folks. Oh no! Yeah, Princess Diana, she's full of roasts apparently. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was a little busy, it seemed, and rightfully so. Diana's like, yeah, I'm not hanging out with this guy. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only a year before her tragic accident took her life. Later in 2005, he married Camilla. Yeah, has anybody seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looks great in that movie, and I want to know if it's worth the watch. Comment down below. Number 9, the Great Fire. One of the most wild Nostradamus predictions of all time. It reads, "The blood of the just will commit a fault at London, burnt through lightning of 23's the 6th. The ancient lady will fall from her high place, several of the same sect will be killed." Now, there are of course many people who believe that this entry here was actually one that predicted the Great Fire of London that occurred in 1666. The line 23's the 6th and times 20 by 3, and then you add 6, you get 66. Right? Quick math. But most importantly, it may also mention London and the royal family. And in real life, this fire did affect them as well. Also, it is said by many that the reference to the lady here is another term for the kingdom, the lady. This means that Nostradamus was predicting, maybe, that the kingdom was going to fall as a result of the Great Fire. So, yeah, he kind of nailed it. I don't know. Number 8, King James. Not to be confused with LeBron James, although he's a pretty good king as well. He's alright, that fellow. This is a different king. In an official 16th century medical book, the actual medical advice at one point was to not bathe. Don't do it or else you're a sinner, I guess. Use not baths or stews, nor sweat too much, for all openeth of the pores of a man's body, and maketh the venomous air to enter, and for to infect the blood. First of all, what? What did you just say? Why is every shred of medical knowledge from the past always written in riddles, like it's a Harry Potter spell? You know what I mean? God forbid you have bronchitis in the 16th century. A doctor is like, ah yes, just a flower petal, we'll fix that. Doctor was one of these, comes in? No way, not listening to that guy. They thought that taking a bath would make you sick, so King James IV, apparently he never took a bath. And his hygiene was so bad that he would sometimes pass on lice to others just by walking by them. He would walk by and they'd be like, ugh. Guy's got Steven Tyler's hair. What is that? Like, can we cut it if it's infected with gross? Can we just, maybe a bald king? How does a bald king sound? Number 7, King Rudolph II. The Holy Roman Emperor from 1552. He was known as a collector of sorts. These royals, they like to collect things. They like to spend their money on weird things. Some princes collect stamps, others collect zoo animals. See, his castle was home to lions, tigers, and orangutans, so good luck getting a full 8 hours of sleep, my friends. He also collected human artifacts, this royal, so that's a bit odd to collect when you're a royal. Imagine having company over, you're like, yeah, watch the lion crap, and also don't mind the jars of eyes. Do you want a drink? Let me get you a drink. King Rudolph II, okay, he's quite important in history, obviously. He supported the scientific revolution a lot, and he also poured tons of money into astrology, so he was into cool stuff. Number 6, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube doesn't like when I say some words, specifically a word that rhymes with Yahtzee. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, I have to mention it. The Duke was also referred to as a bad boy, but just how deep did these incidents cut? Was he like topless on a beach and he's bad, or was he dressed up as something horrible at a Halloween party? It was the latter. Before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from that party. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No. Did he dress up like a witch? No, it would have been fun, but no. Photos leaked of him wearing a World War II German soldier outfit. Can't say much here, but it was even equipped with a specific armband. Yeah, we can't show you either, but you get what I'm saying. This was a not great time. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way. He's a royal, and he does this instead. I don't know, it's very off-putting. Harry said afterwards, quote, "I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone," end quote. Wow, he really meant that one. Really came from the heart, that apology. It was a poor choice of costume, and I apologize, he says. Okay.
Number 5, Princess Margaret's affairs. This isn't really much more than tabloid fluff, but this scandal was a massive pain for the entire royal family, and it was pretty clear that she couldn't care less. A whole bunch of dudes got involved in this, and it wasn't until I learned that it didn't involve Pete Townsend of The Who, but Pete Townsend of Who Cares, and guess what? Just like every single romantic relationship covered by the press, it sucked for everyone involved, but ultimately nothing all that interesting really happened at all. Number 4, covering up Prince Andrew. It's mostly atrocities from here, so buckle up. I cannot say what was alleged to have happened with this case, but what I can say is that there's smoke, then there's fire. The entirety of Prince Andrew's existence has been one massive sham, and the fact that the royal family continues to deny knowledge of it in any way would be laughable if it weren't so teeth-grindingly frustrating. I do genuinely believe with all my heart that they knew, and they didn't do anything about it until it was going to get on their shoes. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you can dive down that rabbit hole yourself. You've got your rules, I've got mine. Number 3, Prince Philip. I have many words for Prince Philip. Words like good, which are immediately followed by riddance. Yeah, Elizabeth's husband was just about the least interested royal in even mildly disguising his attempt for anyone that wasn't a man, white, or as rich as he was. There are so many quotes, so many, they're all horrible. I don't want to say them here, I don't know if I can say them here. Like, there's taking the mask off, and then there's just being an absolute loser. I've heard dudes with the stars and bars tattooed under their breasts say the same things this mummy has said over the course of their equally worthless existences. Not to mention a similar proclivity in dating partners, as Philip and Elizabeth are cousins. Dude passed at 99, which was just about 99 years younger than he looked, and 99 older than he deserved. Number 2, the Bowes-Lyons. When Nerissa and Catherine Bowes-Lyon were born as the cousins of Queen Elizabeth, they were said to have passed at birth. However, it was revealed that they'd in fact lived, but due to their classification as imbeciles, they were abandoned at Earlswood Hospital and their existence was hushed up completely. Seriously. No one went to their funerals, no one cared. The people that are the face of the country will abandon those they view as worthless for no better reason than to keep their image pure of mad blood. They were never visited, no one cared, and it isn't uncommon. JFK had a similar thing happen with his sister, except that was even hidden from him. These are your politicians, your rulers. Look at them go. Wow, look at them. Going all the way over there. And in at number 1, you kinda had to guess it, it's Diana. The entirety of this was a nightmare for everyone. More tabloid crap, a marriage that happened out of convenience, and the straight up mistreatment of a woman made public via dishonest journalistic methods, which was then immediately followed by her unbelievably tragic passing. But Diana was easily the only royal who actually tried to do something with the power she had. Even if it was lip service, just touching a victim of AIDS at the time was enough to change the minds of an entire public. She actually stood for something, but the royal family's image will never change, and it'll never have to.
Kiss the hand, which will be our first point. Believe it or not, kissing the hand or feet of a royal is a tradition that goes back to ancient times. Nowadays, the most remaining monarchies have tossed that tradition aside because, well, hygiene, it's annoying, people don't respect boundaries, and as a kid, nobody has ever liked that. Moroccan royalty, however, has hung on to the tradition. King Mohammed is a big old fan of this old timely custom and has ensured it is legally mandated. Come across a royal in accident? Hand kiss. Having a meeting? Hand kiss. Why talk to the hand when you can give it a little smoochy smooch? Anyways, they did recently have to ban it for the duration of the pandemic to protect the king, obviously, but as of late 2022, the law is back. Hilariously, his son, like all little kids, hates the whole kissing thing. In 2016, a video went viral of Prince Moulay Hassan whipping his hand away and refusing to have a kiss as he went down a line of visiting dignitaries greeting them. His father found humor in it and widely joked the hand-kissing tradition will likely be retired with the prince. Imagine being so good at your job it becomes law that you're locked into it for life. The Bureau of Astronomy for Lifers. In ancient China, the emperor was known as the son of heaven, and and society functioned off the concept that the emperor was God appointed. Naturally, the imperial government would regularly reinforce the idea of the emperor's divine right by using stories and symbolism that indicated heaven's pleasure at the emperor's leadership. The stories and symbolism came from astronomy, with the study equated to divining the future of the empire and its rulers. As of the Qin dynasty, their government had special departments specifically for celestial phenomena, drawing up calendars, producing advice, and evidence. When Zhu Yozong, the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, came to power, he was not only so impressed with the astronomers and their predictions, but also the ability to see past the normal eye. Why, hell, he decided the rules were needed to control the Imperial Bureau of Astronomy. These men were practically prophetic, and this skill invaluable. What if someone stole it? Or one of them wanted to quit and waste their brains on being a farmer instead? No, Zhu needed to make sure that under wraps and locked up for only the Son of Heaven's use. His rule bound all officials in the bureau to their posts, forbidding them from transferring to other departments, leaving for another position, or learning another position. And because it felt like it was such a supernatural skill, surely it must be in the lineage. So their descendants were also bound to astronomy and forbidden from engaging in other fields of work. They've got so little to talk about, it makes more sense to sit in silence. British royalty's list of permissible conversations has about as much flavor and depth as a boiled chicken breast, which the whole family kind of already looks like they eat for 3 meals a day anyways. But more on the British family and their notoriously spiceless food later. According to the former butler of Prince Charles named Grant Harold, the British royal family isn't supposed to discuss intercourse, religion, politics, or money, which are all incredibly relevant things for monarchs to be talking about. Literally all 4 of those things correlate with every facet of their title, job's existence, but okay, prudes. It's against royal etiquette to discuss these subjects between royals, commoners and royals, or even for commoners who are just at a royal event. Prince Charles was apparently a regular breaker of this rule, as proven in 2015 when The Guardian won the 10-year legal press for the release of the so-called Black Spider letters. The Queen herself has made many indirect references to political battles, and naturally, the media aired out Meghan Markle when she once whispered her approval on Ireland's vote to legalize the Big A for women. Instead, Grant said it's advised to discuss travel and the weather only. This has got to be the most boring family on earth, guys. I couldn't survive 2 minutes in that house. When you're royal, you have the pick of the litter, but not without consequence. Much like Queen Elizabeth in the UK, the Emperor of Japan, currently Naruhito, who took the throne in 2019 following the abdication of his father, Akihito, does not play an active role in politics for the country, more so a mouthpiece. However, they still follow some of the most wildly uptight rules imaginable, and one of them is how female members of the Japanese royal family are forbidden from marrying commoners. You can marry who you love, absolutely, but baby girl, should it be a commoner, you have to forfeit the princess status for them. Once known as Princess Nori, now Sayako Kuroda, she took this step in 2005 when she married her older brother's longtime school friend. Princess Mako became engaged to Kamarua, former classmate, in 2017 and addressed the press stating, "From the time I was a child, I was aware upon marrying I would give up my position as a member of the imperial household. Given that situation, I tried to assist the emperor and do whatever I could to fulfill my role as a member in the imperial household, while also valuing my own life." The two were wed in 2021 and Mako now works in New York City. Naturally, there are double standards. The same sacrifice was not required of Prince Akishino, the brother of Sayako, and when he married outside of the Japanese aristocracy. His wife is the daughter of a university professor. Ashiko's wife wasn't the first commoner woman to marry into the Japanese royal family, but she was the first from a middle-class background and was subsequently harassed and dragged through the mud. A royal family that says, hey, leave the dog out of this. Thailand had a pre-existing law that if you insult the members of the royal family in any kind of way, keep in mind it's the royals themselves that get to decide if you offended them, so you could really get in trouble for just like picking your nose near them. It could land you in prison. Each of the offenses is 15 years in prison too. And that trash talk can be in person, in writing, graffiti, or social media. Cue my example from 2015, a man named Thanakorn was charged by a military court for making a sarcastic internet post about Tongdang, aka Copper, the much-loved street dog that had been rescued by the king himself from an alley. In fact, she's so praised for her loyalty and obedience, Tongdang is a household name. The king wrote and illustrated a book about her in 2002, and an animated film in 2015 called Kong Tai Dong, an inspiration, was second in the box office that year. And this regular everyday dude, Thanakorn, understandably rolls his eyes hardcore and let the jokes fly in a social media post about said movie. I guess he didn't realize the dog counted as a royal family member, and he went to prison for 3 months. But others have gone to prison for decades as the injured magistrate convictions have surged since Thailand's arch-royalist generals seized power from the elected government in May of 2014. One man was jailed this year for 30 years for insulting monarchy on Facebook.
Number Number 5, Meghan Markle, solo strut. Okay, back in May 2018, we all set our alarms, we woke up early, and we all watched the royal wedding, right? We sipped our tea in our pajamas and we pretended like we were there, right? Just watching, along with the other billions of people online. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, his new Duchess. At the historic wedding, Thomas Markle was just a no-show. Yeah, Meghan has walked down that aisle by herself in front of 1 billion people watching at home or streaming it, and it was thought at the time that this was because of Thomas's health. See, right before the wedding, Thomas suffered a heart attack, right? Just days before, so of course nobody was upset. It was almost expected for him not to show up. But cut to a year later, we began talking again. Thomas and the Duchess are now not close, it seems. Thomas even spoke out against his own daughter at one point. There was a huge scandal where Meghan even spoke to Oprah, like Oprah and that big tell-all, and Meghan actually said to her father, if you tell me the truth about working with paparazzi, we can help. And he wasn't able to do that, and for me, has really resonated, especially now as a mother, end quote. So yeah, they're not talking, I guess, anymore, which more than fair. If my dad was working with the paparazzi, showing them private letters, I'd be a little pissed too. There's no way though, the guy can't even unlock his email, let alone sending one? No way. Number 4, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's divorce. Prince Charles, the oldest son of the Queen, straight up admitted to having an affair with Camilla Parker before his divorce from his first wife, of course, Princess Diana. Imagine having this is crazy. A princess? You cheated on a princess? That's insane. So in turn, Princess Diana addressed the relationship and what's happening during, you know, that famous 1995 interview with BBC. She couldn't have said it better, if I'm being honest. Diana said herself, quote, well, there's 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded. Yeah, end quote. There's no better way of putting it, I think. It's a pretty baller way of saying it. I don't know. I haven't said baller in like 13 years, but I'm like, you know what? That's a baller move. It's pretty gangster. Diana also said she was in love with riding instructor Major James Hewitt during her marriage to Charles, so everybody was busy looking other directions, it seems. Diana and Charles divorced in 1996, only 1 year before her tragic car accident. Now later in 2005, Charles ended up marrying Camilla. Has anyone seen Spencer? Kristen Stewart looked great in that movie, and now I want to watch it. Is it worth the watch? Let me know in the comments. I didn't see it go to theaters or anything. It kind of snuck by me while I was sleeping on all the good ones. Number 3, Prince Harry costume party. YouTube isn't a fan of some words, specifically one word that rhymes with Yahtzee, and it goes deep with history, as you could assume what I'm talking about. But with this being one of the biggest scandals, I have to bring it up, right? The Duke was always referred to as a bad boy, right? He was the bad royal, the bad boil royal. I don't know, I'm trying new shit here. But just how deep did these incidents cut? Well, before he settled down with Meghan in 2018, Harry had to issue a public apology back in 2005 because, whoops, somebody got photos from a costume party, and a few of them were in poor taste. Did the royal dress up as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast? No, he did not. Did he dress up like a witch? Like a little witch, maybe with a nice witch broom? No, none of that either. No, photos leaked of him wearing World War II German soldier gear. Yeah, I can't say too much, but it was even equipped with an armband, a very bad armband. Again, I can't say too much, you know, nor will YouTube allow us to show too much, but you understand what I'm trying to say. You remember. It was poor taste. He could have dressed up in any way he wanted. He's a literal prince. And he does this? It's off-putting. Harry said afterwards, and I quote, I am very sorry if I caused any offense or embarrassment to anyone. It was a poor choice of costume and I apologize. End quote. Nice, right from the heart. That's good. Really goes deep with the royal history. We love it. Number 2, Vegas getaway. Nice, roll those dice. It's one thing to party like a rock star, but to party like a prince? What does that even mean? I gotta keep this Prince Harry train going because, well, now I'm mad at him, but there's even more photos from history that show what was really going down in the royal family, you know? His priorities, dare I say. After that party incident, just 7 years later, scandalous photos emerged from Harry's Las Vegas trip. Yeah, I had a little boys' night, it seems. It turns out what happens in Vegas may just leak online for your entire family to see, and your grandmother. That's probably not a great time. These scandalous pics were taken during a strip pool game. Lovely, we like that. Make sure you call the right pocket while you're not wearing any. The scandal actually prompted St. James Palace to contact the Press Complaints Commission before the snaps even made their way to British tabloids. Yeah, they knew right off the bat they were fucked. They're like, can we call them? Can we send a pigeon? What's the fastest? And finally, number 1, Boy Jones and other attempts. Okay, being the queen and all in history, a security team is always needed, obviously. And during her reign, specifically Queen Victoria, there were multiple attempts to harm the young queen. First attack was in 1840. It was an 18-year-old man named Edward Oxford, and he fired towards the Queen's carriage. When Edward was accused of high treason, of course, afterwards, he was actually found not guilty due to, you guessed it, insanity. A couple years later, in 1842, it happened again. This time, 2 men fired at her, both also missed. In 1849, her carriage was attacked by William Hamilton. In 1850, as the carriage was passing the gates of Buckingham Palace, Robert Pate, a retired soldier, might I add, ran up and hit her with his cane. Victoria was okay, luckily, but of course she was shook. Then these incidents kept occurring again in 1842, 1849, and 1872. Attempt after attempt after attempt. But then things got a little worse and, dare I say, a little bit more weird. If you haven't heard of Boy Jones or anything that happened there, I saved it for last because it's so horribly creepy. A teenager stalked the Queen back in 1838 until 1841, and his name was Edward Jones. Edward Boy Jones. This guy somehow managed to break into Buckingham Palace more than once, right? Before Assassin's Creed came out, no idea how we thought of this. Guy just knows a route in, and he would break in and would hide under the Queen's sofa. That was his go-to spot. Or he would sometimes just sit on her throne. And one of the worst things ever, sometimes he would go through her drawers. He would go through the Queen's drawers. That's so gross. What? Like that's gross. He would steal her clothes until eventually and thankfully he got caught.
In our number 10 spot, we have Irene of Athens. Starting off this list today, we are heading back to the Byzantine Empire. Irene of Athens was the mother of Constantine VI, and while the pair co-ruled together for almost 2 decades, things ended in quite the tragedy. After the pair co-ruled, Irene did go on to rule on her own from 797 to 802 CE, but you might be wondering how she managed to outrule her son. Well, Irene, the ambitious ruler, wanted full control all to herself, so she asked for the help of some political allies to pull off a scheme against her own son. She began to lead a conspiracy against him to try and get him out of power. The duo did end up reconciling their relationship, but this is not where the story ends. In 786, the public began to turn their backs on Constantine because he had decided to divorce his wife and instead marry his mistress. Irene saw this as a second chance and once again chose to conspire against her own son. Honestly, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, this lady did not care. Here's where things in the story get exceptionally gory. Irene not only ordered the arrest of her son, but also ordered that his eyes be gouged out. Yep. That's how good old Mumsy came into power. In our number 9 spot today, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth was a Hungarian noblewoman who lived from August of 1560 to August of 1614. She was born into one of the oldest and most powerful families in Transylvania, and she was well educated and ran various estates and bore many children. Oh, and this is all happening while she was also killing young women and bathing in their blood. Yeah. Weird, gross, terrible. Elizabeth is known for killing her servants and bathing in their blood as she believed it would keep her young. Guess no one told her about moisturizing and minding your own business. All accounts of Elizabeth remember her as a terrible, evil person. It is said that her number of victims most likely ranges somewhere from 175 to 200, but some claim it might be as many as 600 people. It is no wonder she is referred to as Countess Dracula. In our number 8 spot today, we have Olga of Kiev. Olga of Kiev became queen regent in 945 CE after her husband was killed, and during the time her son was just too young to rule. Olga knew that once her son was old enough to be crowned king, her power would be taken away, so she needed to see her wishes carried out before that happened. Her wishes included the capturing and killing of those who took the life of her husband, which was carried out using scalding hot water. Yeah, don't even want to imagine what that would have been like. Don't kill the king, I guess. Historically, it doesn't seem to work out well. Apparently in doing this, however, Olga developed a bit of a bloodthirst, and she would not rest until everyone associated with the people who killed her husband were all eliminated. She is the ultimate ride or die. It seemed like if you even looked in the wrong direction or breathed in the vicinity of someone who had something to do with the king's slaying, you could kiss your own life goodbye. Olga took hundreds of people out of the tribe that the killers were from. She devised a plan to bury the tribe leaders alive, and she even came up with a plan to set fire to their entire village. It is said that Olga may have locked the tribe's leaders in a bathhouse and burned it down, but we don't know for sure. All we do know is that she was not okay. In our number 7 spot today, we have Wu Zetian. Throughout the long and storied history of China, there has only ever been one woman who held supreme power, and that is Empress Wu Zetian. Of course, considering this historic feat, she wanted to ensure that she kept her power by any means necessary. She had all of her rivals killed, so anyone who could possibly overthrow her or come for her seat on the throne was eliminated. The Empress ordered the execution of the previous Empress as well as members of her own own family. She had multiple methods of taking these people out, and rumor has it that she even had her own grandmother and 2 of her grandchildren killed for going against her. It didn't matter who you were, if you threatened her power, you were done for. It is said that after a while, the Empress decided to do a little less killy and a little more lovey-lovey. Yeah, apparently she started spending more time with her lovers, using some aphrodisiacs. You know, we all are a little crazy when we're young, but as we get older, we all crave the simplicity and just someone to love. Right? Of course though, people don't forget, and they were sure to exact their revenge. The people fought back and ended up having all of her lovers killed, and the Empress herself was exiled. You know what they say about karma? She does not miss. In our number 6 spot today, we have Mary I. Queen Mary I didn't get the nickname Bloody Mary from nowhere. Oh no, this name was certainly earned. Mary was a Catholic queen in a Protestant country, which, as you can imagine, was quite problematic when she ascended the throne of England in 1553. Although her reign only lasted 5 years, she made a mark on history in a multitude of ways. She was the first true Queen of England, and she was quite a vicious ruler. During her time as queen, Mary announced a war against Protestantism, which left many who belonged to the religion being charged with hearsay. Doesn't sound all that bad until you learn that at the time the usual sentence for hearsay was to be burned at the stake. Nice. Mary was responsible for the burning of over 300 Protestants during her time as queen, which unsurprisingly left her quite unpopular.
At number 5, The Horse and His Boy. On the less violent end of the spectrum, Jahangir was actually a big fan of the arts, science, and worldly things. Unlike his father, who couldn't read and write, an interesting skill for a ruler not to have, Jahangir was all about it. He really wasn't interested in military, which was a task he left to his son. But he did inherit his father's wealth, and considering he wasn't working in the military, he had time to indulge his curiosity. In his memoirs, there are fantastic paintings of exotic animals. There's a painting of a zebra that has a very funny story behind it. The zebra was being taken as a gift to the Safavid Shah, and it was traveling through the port of the empire. Jahangir heard about it and had it brought to court first, and didn't believe that it was real. He thought that it was a painted horse, so he had people try and wash them off. Only when the paint didn't come off did he realize his mistake and ordered that the wondrous creature be painted. At number 4, Shah Jahan and the Taj Mahal. Okay, so this one isn't messed up for violence or anything, but it is the ultimate love story, and we just can't leave it off this list. There is one part that is messed up to me because, man, I don't even know, but we will get to that. If you've ever been to India, then one of the stops you made on your trips was probably to the Taj Mahal, a breathtaking mausoleum built by the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan to commemorate the love of his life. Considering how big and intricate it is, you know that their love was bigger than any storybook. An Indian poet called the Taj Mahal a teardrop on the cheek of time, a testament to grief and power. Mumtaz Mahal was Shah Jahan's favorite wife, forsaking all of his other wives just to be with her. They went everywhere together, even on military missions. This is where, from my perspective, where things get crazy. This woman delivered 14 children for her husband. 14. Sadly, whilst giving birth to the last, she passed away, inspiring her king to build this massive structure. Both Shah Jahan and his love are buried beneath it. At number 3, Brothers at Odds. Shah Jahan's rule was considered the golden rule of the Mughal Empire, so how do you top that? Aurangzeb did not even bother trying, and he kinda sucked. He was Shah Jahan's 3rd son, and he was a very military-minded man, showing tactical and strategic military skill and unrivaled determination. Whereas his brother was a man of letters, and no, not the kind from Supernatural. Aurangzeb wanted power, and so in order to secure his rule, he confined his ailing father to his own palace, caused the death of one of his brothers, and had 2 more of his brothers, a son and a nephew, executed. He was literally committing fratricide left, right, and center. But it didn't matter to him because he gained control. His desire to prematurely end the lives of those who stood in his way was described as, quote, a wolf thirsting for the blood of his brothers, end quote. You would think that this motivation to gain power and rule on his own terms would mean that he had big plans for the empire, which in a way is true, but those plans and changes led to a lot of oppression, but we will get to that in a bit. At number 2, Staked. Before we get into the oppression that Aurangzeb caused to his empire, let's talk about Emperor Farrukh Siyar. Farrukh Siyar was emperor of the Mughal Empire from 1713 to 1719. He was described as an incapable ruler who gave his power to all of his advisors. His rule caused many concerns conspiracies and plots to arise within the court. He caused a lot of people a lot of pain for his plight for power. With the help of his allies, he gave many of his enemies the gift of the big sleep, but by far the most ruthless thing he did was kill Jahandar Shah and Zulfikar Khan Nusrat Jung. What made their deaths so brutal was the fact that when they went the emperor hung their heads on poles, and just to add insult to injury, he made their parents walk at their funeral. Luckily for the people of the Mughal Empire, Farrukh Sahir was killed by unknown assailants at the instructions of his close relatives, putting an end to his awful reign. And finally, at number 1, the Great Oppressor. Aurangzeb's rule sort of had 2 chapters to it. At first, Aurangzeb was a capable ruler of a mixed Muslim-Hindu empire who was feared yet respected for his vigor and skill, but around 1680, Aurangzeb's rule changed drastically in both policy and attitude. His once unified people of both Muslims and Hindus broke apart, and people of Hindu faith became subordinates, not colleagues. On top of that, Aurangzeb added some more oppression to the mix and not only destroyed Hindu temples, but he also reimposed the Jizya tax on non-Muslims, after the tax was initially banned by Emperor Akbar. For the first 20 years of Aurangzeb's rule, he did not impose a tax, but all of a sudden he started demanding these payments, and historians believe that Hindu uprisings are what caused the emperor to act harshly towards the non-Muslim population. This discrimination caused a revolt to unfold that Aurangzeb's third son supported. Aurangzeb spent his last 50 years taking his aggressions out on the Hindus in the empire, and it's for this reason that he is remembered by many as a tyrant. Before we wrap things up for today, I want you guys to leave a comment down below telling me what from this list you think was the most messed up from these Mughal kings. Leave me your thoughts down below.
Number 10. Marie Antoinette, Madame Deficit, the last queen of France and maybe the last time royals got away with, well, being royals. Her whole existence was opulence, which is really just salt in the wound, when most of your citizens probably can't even afford a portion of salt because they're broke or because there's food shortages. Wasn't a good time. But if you looked into the royal palace, you can bet she's got a pantry full of bread and a bowl of fruit just ready for the pickings. She even had the nerve to purchase a necklace that, if through today's inflation, would be worth $12 million US. Ooh, that's a lot of money I wish I had. People were starving, and honestly, if people don't have anything, including food, ooh, it's not gonna be a good time. Imagine a whole country acting up because they haven't had their Snickers yet. Well, that ended up sparking a revolution. Very confusing, and in all that confusion, both the king and queen lost their heads. Wasn't good. Number 9. Queen Victoria. Oh blighty. Man, it must be nice to have a whole era in history named after you. Maybe I'll get one day. The cheddar time. I don't know. Cheese, I don't know, big ched? We'll see what happens. Queen Victoria had some strange quirks about her. One that I can almost get behind, but not quite, is her niche for eating fast. Maybe too fast. I'm a guy who likes to make things simple, easy meals. The faster I can slip into a couch with an ice cold beer and a movie, I'm a happy guy. And or enjoy said food with the movie. Queen Victoria liked her meals to last no longer than 30 minutes. That means while you're on the appetizer, she's on the main course. And while you're on the main course, she's ordering coffee. Look, I respect the hustle. I get that. But maybe this is too much. That being said, are you going to be the one who brings it up to Her Royal Majesty? Listen, if you want to see tomorrow's 5-minute brunch, you better keep it to yourself. Number 8. Cleopatra. Don't we all miss Elizabeth Taylor? I know I do. Sometimes, I wish I was her. She's just beautiful. Can you blame me? I honestly wish I was the real Cleopatra too though. All that power, and to not have one, but 2 Romans wrapped around her finger. Ooh, she was the last pharaoh of Egypt, but maybe had the most drama. Sure, Elizabeth Taylor was the most beautiful and chic woman in all of Hollywood, and she may or may not have had a few men wrapped around her finger too, but she never had to deal with the world's largest empire and her own throne. All whilst managing to stay the most beautiful and chic. I can barely manage to toast in the morning. Never mind all those affairs and, well, the marriage affairs too. There's a lot of affairs happening. Number 7. Queen Isabella of Spain. Queen Isabella is known for a few things. A lot of stuff YouTube probably doesn't want me to talk about. Insert religious persecution here. However, I think she should be remembered for something else. Something rather strange. When I was a kid, I would run around outside for hours, oftentimes ending up in the mud. My mother would always say, "It's time to hose you down, son." And she wasn't wrong, because I probably needed a good hose down. Now, regardless of how much dirt was behind my ears, I didn't want to wash. I was this big stupid kid. Can you blame me? I was proud of the scruff, but that's because I was going to have another wash most likely within the next 12 hours. I always got hosed down at some point. Queen Isabella, however, boasted to others that she only bathed twice in her life. Sweet Lord Mary Mother of God woman, that is not something to boast about. Due to some water access issues, the Catholic Church was like, baths? Who needs them? You know what? Baths are sinful anyway. Being so close to God, so she doesn't bathe. Cleanliness is next to godliness, except in that time period where not bathing means you're actually closer to the big JC upstairs, so that's how it goes. Number 6, Queen Elizabeth II. No crusts! Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch. God bless the Queen, and God save the Queen. Shout out to the UK, Chetty loves you, how you doing? Come and see me sometime, I love you guys. Now sure, she's not the most awful spoiled queen in history, but she is a queen, and that does mean she can have things her way. Like for example, all of her sandwiches have to have the crusts cut off. Yes, just like children. Yes, just the way I like them too. No, I'm not a big baby. I'm a big strong man who totally doesn't rely on the women in his life. No, what are you saying? Dude, stop. Mom, I love you. Anyway. Well, yes, it's true the Queen's sandwiches have to have her crust cut off. Is it the worst thing ever? No, I don't think so, but what if her sandwich showed up with crust? We don't really burn people at the stake anymore, so what would she do? Would she fire them, I guess? It's kind of a little thing to get fired over. I don't know. Anyway, speaking of getting fired. Number 5, women's rights. Listen, it would be difficult to talk about this list without bringing it up. And ladies, all I want you to know is that you're gorgeous and I love you. But queens of the past, although they might be royalty, were severely lacking in rights. This is a time when men ruled, literally, and unfortunately that means a lot of women got the raw end of the deal. Just as an example, women have only been able to vote in the United States since 1920. There was a lot of work that had to be done, which sounds like a long time, but it really isn't. Women of the past, and especially the medieval world, basically needed a man to walk through their life, whether they liked it or not. Can't own property, business, can't sign contracts, basically everything they need to do has to go through their husbands first. Sure, royals had it easier, but I'd argue if someone could just unalive you or lock you away in a tower without consequence, do you really have rights at all to begin with? I don't know, I don't think so, that's not right. We're gonna do better, we'll do better. Number 4. Herod the Not So Great. Herod the Great was the king of Judea in 37 BC. Herod the Great was also a monster. I know I've given Henry VIII grief for Anne Boleyn, but Buddy here, he just throws out wives like it's his business. Well, it kinda was, actually. He was a busy man, having an estimated 14 children with different wives. There's also a good chance that there was more, being since that female births were just not recorded. He also unalived a lot of other people too. This guy was just so much of a tyrant that both Jewish and Christian faiths depict him as a tyrant. Way to go, dude. Nice. Number 3, the mayor's alibi. Alright, here's a modern one for you. Yes, I know the mayor is not a king. I understand that. But they still hold a decent amount of power, and this happened in the 90s, which I hate to bring up because that was a really long time ago. Yeah, I know, right? I know, I remember that too. Mayor Barry Waite and his wife were just as comfy as peas and carrots when one day his wife was mysteriously unalived. Barry was not a suspect at first, but slowly as time went on, his alibi began to unravel, and he seemed less and less trustworthy. As multiple financial-based scandals were beginning to rear their heads, it later became understood that his wife was going to seek legal aid after learning about Barry's doings, strangling her in a fit of rage. Years later, he was convicted and sentenced to 40 years in prison, so maybe we haven't learned much from our historical past. A man in power in fear of losing it to a woman has removed her from the equation. I guess we'll never change. Number 2, one last ride. King Philip V was down bad. The CEO of Naughty Time. This man liked to get down and to be a certain kind of dirty. He could not get enough of women. He loved them, his wives and mistresses included. Reported to try and get the deed done at least 3 times a day. Now you might be saying to yourself, but Big Ched, what's so wrong with that? Everyone likes a little mooey once in a while. Hey, I hear you. A little toe curling once in a while, it's a great thing, if you catch my drift. But Philip may have enjoyed it just a little too much, as when his beloved wife was on her deathbed, he tried to squeeze in one more D appointment. Your wife is dying and all you can think about is a little afternoon delight? A bouquet of flowers and I love you would have been fine, but who am I to judge? You go ahead. Weirdo. Number 1, the last Tsar. Nicholas II of the Romanovs was the last Tsar of Russia. What did he do to his wife? Well, not much, actually, and that's the issue at hand. It's his inaction that hurt her and the family the most. You see, Russia was an interesting nation in the early 1900s. As most nations were modernizing, Russia was still somewhat stuck in the past. A lack of rights for anyone, no industry, and the monarch was kind of oppressive. Well, Nicholas the Tsar was going to change it. At some point, maybe. Okay, well, he didn't. It would take a whole history class to break down what actually happened during those crucial years, but in a nutshell, there was this new fun idea called communism. And with the lack of the Tsar's support to the people, this is serious neglect we're talking about here, the people revolted. The monarchy was overthrown, and in an event that's actually quite sad, the Tsar and his whole family were unalived by the new government. His inaction got his wife done in. Way to go, Nikki. Number 10. What a drag. Bachelor number 1. What would you do if I refused to marry you? Well, I would probably get quite violent and lead to the destruction of 10,000 lives at the Battle of Hastings. Might just drag you around by your hair and see where the night goes. William I, or more appropriate, William the Conqueror, was a fierce warrior and the first Norman king of England. Being the illegitimate child he was to the throne, some people didn't exactly respect the power moves old Willie was making. People rebelled, and he crushed them. Oh, and there was this one time that he fancied a woman named Matilda. Being the respected woman that she was, she declined Willie's advances. Willie, not taking no for an answer, promptly dragged her around by the hair until she agreed to marry him. Gee, what a swell guy. Number 9. Let them eat cake. France had seen better days in the 1790s. People were starving, the economy was bust, and for some reason the poorest citizens were being taxed the most. When cries were made from the people, they demanded that change be made. King Louis XVI, being the great leader he was, he listened to the people and there was no problem ever again. Oh wait, he did nothing and the country had a bloody revolution. The man supposed to be leading his people failed to act. In fact, he did less than nothing, often trying to silence the riots by force. But when people are very hungry and you're living fat with high society, you can lose your head in all that chaos. While the famous quote, "let them eat cake," may not have actually been said, it's a good reminder of the disconnect between the upper class and poor. Leaving your people to starve isn't the best idea if you want to be a king for a long time. Number 8. Cashback. King George III had a simple ask of the American colonies. Right then, we just saved you all from the French and Indians, so now it's time to do the right thing and pick up the bill. Britain introduced new taxes on the colonies in order to pay back what it had spent on the previous war. But in reality, he was asking the colonies to pay up without much in return. Basically, I'm the king, I saved your skins, give me more money, which most people at the time couldn't afford. And I'm still gonna boss you around. The British Empire may have been victorious, but it was the colonists who felt all the effects of the war and the economy. This happened multiple times before some patriots had had enough and decided to act. And what he did when the people he was forcing to give money spilt a little tea? Well, he sent British troops for a semi-friendly military occupation. I'd hate to loan this guy a nickel. Number 7. Terrible Ivan. He wasn't called Ivan the very friendly and generous and would for sure never cause any harm to anyone ever. He was Ivan the Terrible, and for good reason. His actions are very unholy. Let's start with the fact that he killed his son's pregnant wife. And when his son came to confront dear old dad, his son was struck with a pointed staff, killing him in a fit of rage. A legend tells us that once St. Basil's Cathedral was finished construction, he was so pleased with the architect, to reward him for such magnificent work, Ivan gouged his eyes out so that no one would ever design something so beautiful again. His paranoia also caused the slaughter of Novgorod, where after he was done claiming thousands of lives, he burned all the fields just for good measure. Wouldn't want all those dead people farming without your permission. Should we tell him about the other world monuments? Number 6. Off with her head! Henry VIII is more well known for how he treated his wives more than his leadership. With a reign of over 20 years, the man had a few wives. 2 of his wives were executed for ridiculous reasons, another was divorced. Turns out, actually, the church wouldn't grant that divorce he was looking for. So Henry went and did the next best thing. He broke away from the Catholic Church and dissolved the monasteries, taking their wealth and redistributing it as he saw fit. Nothing is unholier than trying to get away from the church. Historians believe that his divorce actually led to the English Reformation. Number 5. The Terror of London. If you're into serial killers and just a little goth or emo, I mean who isn't, then you know who Jack the Ripper is. If you don't, he was a serial killer who roamed the streets of Victorian England and killed multiple women of the evening, in what can be called the first, or one of the first, modern modern serial killers. Jack the Ripper, however, is one of the psychos who got away. No one is 100% sure on who the Terror of London was. However, that hasn't stopped people from theorizing on his or her true identity. No, not Queen Victoria herself, although there are some who believe he was a woman, which would explain how he got away so easily. However, another popular theory is that it was the Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor. While there isn't much evidence to support this claim or any of the claims really, it is interesting and makes me wonder, maybe the royal was a killer? We'll never know. Number 4. Short Kings Unite! Even though I'm a semi-charming and moderately handsome internet host, I suffer from an illness a lot of men do. I suffer from shortness. When the Lord was making me, he just put a few extra drops of cute in the mix. And then there was no more room for my legs to grow. I just see life from a little bit down below. Although, I own it, and thank God I don't have little man syndrome. All toxic jokes aside, Queen Victoria may have been a good fit for us short kings, as she was barely 5 feet tall. She's known for being a formidable queen, but when you're that short, it can sometimes be difficult to keep your stature. Somebody take me seriously. Number 3. Dollies. Okay, so maybe my Sailor Moon merch collection is weird. Maybe I just want to be a cute blonde Japanese girl with a short skirt fighting evil. Can you blame me? However, something I always find strange, no matter who it is and who owns it, is a doll collection. Why? Why? And it's never a couple, it's always a large collection. And tell me why anytime you go to visit someone and stay overnight, they always put you in a guest room where the majority of the dolls reside. There's nothing like 100 pair of creepy plastic eyes staring you down while you're trying to sleep in a bed that isn't yours. Well, Her Royal Majesty had her own collection of dolls. Yeah, that's right. You can just imagine the kind of treatment these dolls received. It said she had hundreds of them and most likely wore higher quality clothes than most common folk at the time. Great, now my worst nightmares outnumber me and they're dressed to the nines. Whew, dolls are just creepy. Number 2, Here Comes the Bride. Imagine being so powerful, so mighty, and influential that you'll create 2 Western traditions. Sure, the Christmas tree is great, but I'd argue the white wedding dress is more. She wasn't the first to wear a white wedding dress, but she was the one that made it happen. There's a few reasons why, and the obvious one is flexing that royal coin, but imagine trying to keep pure white clothes clean in the past. My mom makes a mean spaghetti and meatballs, and I have a difficult time keeping those stains off my white t-shirts, which, if you also ask my mom, is a bad color for me. I was a messy kid. That's why other colors at the time made sense. After all, there's no dry cleaning in the 1800s. At least not with modern machines and stain remover. Hey Alexa, can you add stain remover to my list? Number 1. Send lewds. Despite being known as a somewhat prudent queen, apparently the queen had an eye for the art that was lewd. In one case, the royal husband and wife gave each other art. She got some nice work, and he got some nice works, if you catch my drift. We all know how nudity and lewd imagery can be treated by those who wish to censor it. Queen Victoria felt the opposite and had somewhat of an appreciation for the human form, even commissioning a lewd painting of herself. At least lewd for the time, it was more like a wrists and ankles kind of thing, but you know.
Kicking off the list at number 10, 18 years old. Queen Victoria's reign began back in 1837 and lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. At just age 18, Alexandria Victoria had to rise up to the throne. She was born on May 24th, 1819. Queen Victoria was the 5th in line when she was born, so right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely she would ever get the crown to begin with. And then one by one, all of her family members began passing away. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed, and then her father and her grandfather both died a week apart from each other. So by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next in line for the throne. Number 9. The Kensington System. So as if that wasn't already stressful enough being at that age and already seeing what's happened, Victoria was brought up under the Kensington System, which if you haven't heard of before is pretty awful. Victoria's mother, Duchess Victoria of Kent, created this Kensington System to control her daughter, ideally. She literally isolated the child from playmates or even family members. Her mother did this to keep her pure. Yeah, the system sounds awful. Her mother would monitor her every single action, including who she can see or speak to. Victoria only had 2 playmates growing up entirely. She had her half-sister, Princess Fedora of Leiningen, and the Duchess's attendant, Sir John Conroy, his daughter, Victoria. I mean, I only had 3 friends growing up, but this is just cruel. This is a whole new level. She shared a room with her mother until she was the queen. She literally couldn't walk down the hallway alone without her mother being right there by her side. Victoria has reflected on her childhood, and obviously she hates John Conroy for manipulating her mother. She refers to him as demon incarnate. Number 8. Publicity. The Duchess was pretty cruel to Victoria. Just because you're next in line doesn't mean it's going to be glamorous speed dating and no one's doing a musical number while you meet your handsome Prince Charming. It's nothing like that at all. Victoria was forced to go on these long, excruciating, boring tours around England in hopes for the Duchess to sell her daughter to the public eye. So these crowds would start to gather at all these appearances. They loved the young Victoria. Thing is, during one of these tours, October 1835, Victoria got really sick. She had a bad fever, and the Duchess was using the weak Victoria. She was taking advantage of her. But luckily she got better, and obviously her mother couldn't do anything crazy, but she had her sights set on her while she was sick. That's pretty cruel. That's disgusting. Number 7. Name change. Every year on May 24, we set off fireworks and we have way too many hot dogs. It's the best, right? It's called Victoria Day. It's for sure called Victoria Day, right? There's no question about that. Victoria Day, her day. Well, back in 1819, Victoria was christened in an almost private ceremony. It was small, and Victoria's uncle, Prince Regent, only let a few people come. Her name, as I mentioned earlier, was originally Alexandrina Victoria, and at that time, the name Victoria wasn't regal. It was of French origin, almost an odd name to have at the time, really. So when this throne snuck up to her, she was advised to change her name to something more traditional, but as our calendars tell us, she said, nah, I'm good, I'll keep it. Number 6. Moving out. Queen Victoria had turned 18 right before she was handed the crown. The timing here was key because now this meant Victoria could leave and just do things. Yeah, for once in her damn life, she could leave her mother and John. She moved from Kensington to Buckingham Palace, and after that point, Victoria, of course, didn't speak with John or her mother really ever again. It was just a couple years into Victoria's reign where John's influence started to get limited. He ended up resigning, and then he moved to Italy, and then when she was crowned a year later at Westminster Abbey, Queen Victoria wrote in her diary, "I shall remember this day as the proudest of my life." Queen Victoria was the first royal family member to live at Buckingham Palace. She moved. She was like, I'm gonna go live over there and be the first. I'm gonna start my new thing. I'm never gonna live in a palace. I'm like, that's a good castle, I like it. Driveway's a little long for me. Shoveling would hurt my Canadian back, but otherwise, I like the bricks.
Number 5, King of Egypt. His Majesty Farouk I, by the grace of God, King of Egypt and the Sudan, that was his full title, was disposed during his nation's 1952 revolution and spent the remainder of his days in exile to Italy. In his haste to avoid getting the Mussolini treatment, he left behind a majority of his most prized possessions. When the people got a look at what he was storing behind the walls of his residence, they were a bit disgusted to find an excessive number of expensive suits, rare stamps and coins, jewels, luxury vehicles, and many other things that I will never afford. Now, what else would he have that would be considered strange? I'll let you take a guess. Was it A, a blam blam cachet, B, piles and piles of a white substance that made the 80s fun, or C, an unsettling amount of gardening magazines? Go ahead and let us know in the comments below. I'll give you a second. Nope, time's up. If you said secret option D, you'd be right. What was it, you ask? Well, it was a disturbing amount of adult entertainment. So much so, it wouldn't even fit underneath his mattress. Man, that's a lot. That's too much. That's too much. Number 4, Peter III. Remember the last time you played with your toys as a kid? Same. And let us know what your favorite toys were as a kid. Let's see if we have some shared favorites. I'm actually curious. That's kind of a cool thing to talk about. Well, for Peter III, it was little army men, or tin soldiers, I guess you'd call them. And yes, he played with them as an adult, staging mock battles. Is it the weirdest thing ever? No, it's not. But he was a king, so that's a wee bit strange. Hey, I love army men just as much as the next guy, especially those little green plastic dudes. I used to love those video games too. Very underrated in my opinion. Love that stuff. It also makes me think of that scene in Spaceballs. Enough references aside, you never really know someone until you've seen the money they've spent on their army men collection. Number 3, Ibrahim I. Fur everywhere. Ibram I of the Ottoman Empire was the 18th Sultan and the #1 purchaser of fine furs. Personally, I've never had any fine furs. I grew up in the trailer park and Mama always said that fur was cruel anyway, so I never felt the luxury of fine furs, if you will. It must be nice because Ibram loved them so much. Like, he really loved them. His whole wardrobe consisted of them, in fact. Plus, his walls were covered in them. And apparently even his curtains. I don't do well in heat, so I'll pass on that. I'd be sweating way too much. Too much fur. Number 2, the locksmith. Who are you and how'd you get in here? I'm the locksmith. And I'm the locksmith. Classic Leslie Nielsen. God, I love that guy. I love those movies. I'd love to make one day. Or star in one. Hollywood, call me. King Louis XVI, the last king of France. We're back to him again. The man spent his time and money on something rather strange. No, not all was spent on his wife and her life. And yeah, I'm kind of putting him on the list twice, but trust me, it's weird. I mean, come on, he gave the queen whatever the heck she wanted. Well, apparently he loved to spend his time and money on locksmithing. What? Yeah, that's so weird. He would spend his time trying to get into locks and understand them. He was also stated as saying that every man should have a passion. Hey, maybe put down the locks and start helping the people as a passion. There's an idea. What a great idea. Feed the people. Instead, I'm just going to work on this lock. I'm just going to go ahead and just, yeah, almost got it. Yep. Number 1, Christian VII of Denmark. I saw this and I just had to put it on here. I mean, come on. Apparently the guy wasn't very mentally stable. I mean, who is these days? Apparently the royal spent a lot of his time waxing his carrot, polishing the flagpole, tenderizing the gabagoo, charming the snake, self-firing on all cylinders, the one-handed bedroom dance, what I did all summer long in high school. You get the point, okay? You understand what I'm trying to say. Truth of the matter is, you don't get there with a little help from Vaseline or St. Ives. The man bought time so he could be this way. The man is either a legend or a crazy person. Imagine having that much money and that much time in your day that that's all you do.
Number 10, Harry and Meghan. Most recent on this list, and honestly, this whole ordeal has been pretty interesting to watch. It's rare for people to willingly leave the royal family, but based on the interviews conducted with Oprah, it isn't hard to see why they did it. The primary reason for their leaving were related to false articles being generated due to their fame. And moreover, the royal family's unwillingness to aid them on the matter. But it was clear that this was a long time coming, as Harry was frequently subjected to neglect by his father. Not to mention, he was the child of a previous marriage, which we will talk about that later. Meghan, on the other hand, was subjected to extreme amounts of passive-aggressive racism, and the press piled on top of that likely became too much. As much of an anti-monarchist as I am, it's hard for me not to at least mildly sympathize and appreciate their leaving. Number 9, Prince Harry's Halloween. What isn't hard to sympathize with is Harry's taste in costumes being fairly poor. Dressing as a German World War II officer, which is bad for a bunch of reasons I can't say by name but you should already know, was a poor idea, and the public made sure that was known. Now, as much as it's fun to pretend that Harry was the only one screwing up here, we can't really do that, and we have to note that the stated theme of the costume party was colonials and natives. Yeah, it's pretty bad. William apparently did also attend that one as well, but I'm certain he didn't dress in anything that similarly demeaned victims of cultural and genetic erasure. Right? Yeah, look, it's nice that Harry left the family, but as long as he bears the blood of royals, he will profit off everything that was spilt in their name. Spare will probably be an interesting read though. Number 8, the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I. This is a historical channel, so I would like to grab a few times in which the royal family went through some historical troubles. Queen Elizabeth I is one of the most well-known British rulers in history. Her life has been extremely well documented, and she's also the possessor of an interesting title, the Virgin Queen. It is claimed that she had never been romantic with anyone, though this is hotly contested, as while it's clear that she very well did not have any official children and never officially married, these are the Tudors we are talking about. There's no conclusive evidence that this ever occurred, of course, and that would become even more true as more of her reputation was based entirely on the notion that she was unwed. But dude, the Tudors, I mean, yeah, I doubt it. Number 7, Princess Anne's dog. The first member of the royal family to ever be convicted of a criminal offense, and it was this one. Yeah, see, Prince Anne liked dogs and decided on April 1st that she'd take her dogs out for a walk. Before we get into the details of this, I want to make something clear. Not all dog breeds are bad by default, though different breeds require different degrees of attention and care to ensure they're probably sociable. I have to be honest, but when you're a member of the royal family by blood, or leash, I imagine that people are going to have a hard hard time house training you. So it's no surprise that there were 2 bites that day as a result of the poor social training the dog had received. As a result, Princess Anne pled guilty to the charge under the Possession of Dangerous Dogs Act, which is a thing in the UK. Look, dogs are great. I'm a cat person. All animals need to be raised with attention and care. Same goes for people. It's pretty clear to me that the royals are equally as bad at doing both. Number 6. Edward VIII. Here is a historical doozy for you. Anyone remember the reign of King Edward VIII? No? Well, you probably blinked, because it only lasted 10 months. From the moment of his ascension, Ed Boy was clearly aiming for something weird. He was starting to get a little more open about politics, which is a big no-no in the royal family unless you're being racist, then it's okay. He also wanted the face that would end up on his coin to point in a different direction. These did actually get printed, but are super rare. He also wanted to marry a woman, but was told he couldn't, so he started getting a little annoyed and eventually abdicated the throne for love. Well, we're glad he moved on to better things, and there are no embarrassing photos of him meeting with certain people from certain countries prior to certain wars. None at all.
Number 5. Diamond scandals. Queen Mary wasn't the only queen with sticky fingers, it seems. The affair of the diamond necklace has sparked many conversations. France's queen from 1774 to 1792 was Marie Antoinette, and if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because she was the last queen before the French Revolution. She was also known for spending a buck on jewelry. She liked the diamonds. Now this Countess de la Motte was this young lady, a friend of the queen supposedly, who entered the French court in 1785. Now she got somebody to disguise herself as the queen, and then she acted like she was in love with this high society member, all to get her hands on this $12 million necklace. Now she said that she would pay, but never ended up paying a dime, so that's horrible by itself, and the queen supposedly had no idea about any of this or what happened to the necklace. Although this countess pretended to be her friend beforehand. The public went on to hate her for this, not believing in the scandal of course. One of the most notable lines from Marie Antoinette was when the French spoke out for not being able to afford bread. She apparently said, "Well, let them eat cake," which led into the French Revolution and ultimately her demise. Shine bright like a diamond, I guess.
At number 4, test drives. Catherine the Great of Russia was well known for a number of things. She was known for being a good leader, a strong ruler, and surprisingly for her naughty bedroom fun times as well. She was well known for her adventures in baby making, and there was once a rumor that she did the deed with a horse. Obviously that wasn't actually true, however she did do it with a lot of men. The only problem that she really faced when it came to finding a new partner was actually having the time to do so. I mean, it's not like she could swipe through Tinder while sitting on her throne, right? What was most important to her was finding a new lover who was skilled in the sack, and she didn't really want to waste time on testing these guys out, so she had someone else do it for her. Catherine had a friend take her potential partner out on a test drive, so to speak, so that she wasn't wasting her time on someone who couldn't meet her standards. Remember, she is a very busy woman. It is said that on a couple of occasions, Catherine's tester friend was caught in bed with Catherine's partner again well after the Empress was with him, and that made things a little complicated, but I imagine that they got past that. Or at least I really hope they did.
Number 3. Change religion. Ruling alongside the pharaoh Akhenaton from 1353 to 1336, Queen Nefertiti, aka Lady of Grace, aka the Lost Queen of Egypt, was only 15 years old when she married 16-year-old Akhenaton. Now, alongside her new young husband, she built an entirely new capital city called Amarna and ruled over what's now considered the wealthiest period in ancient Egyptian history. But when it comes to spoiled queens, or rather queens who could do anything they believe with their power, we have to mention the queen that changed Egypt's religion. Both her and her co-ruler were in a cult, the cult of the sun god Aten. In the earliest accounts of the queen, she assisted her husband in a ritual that smited the female enemies of Egypt at the time, and there have been a few blocks that have since been recovered from the Theban tombs of the royal butler that depicts the queen wearing her unique blue crown, part of these sun god rituals. So now cut to the end of the king's ruling, the Aten was now Egypt's main god. Some queens change laws, others change religion.
At number 2, fake village. Imagine being so privileged and so disconnected from the world that you pretend to be poor for fun. Well, that's pretty much what Marie Antoinette did. This French queen was known for her lavish and opulent lifestyle, and that's really the only life that she knew. Apparently, living the life of a rich queen started to get a little boring for her, and she wanted to find an escape, and so she got her people to build a fake village for her so that she could pretend to be a commoner. This fake village included 11 cottages, a lake, a water mill, a a working dairy, a windmill, a barn, and other quote-unquote peasant buildings. Marie apparently loved this little peasant village, and she would bring other people to enjoy it too. When she brought her guests to the village, she expected them to yes-and their way through the day and really immerse themselves into their role of a common person. She would even tell her ladies to ditch the ball gowns and wear something simple to blend in. Marie even took her kids to the fake village to teach them about farming. Even though she loved her pretend peasant lifestyle, it still didn't help her bond with the real common people, and it certainly didn't save her from the guillotine.
And finally, coming in at a #1 spot, surprise entrance. The last true pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII, ruled from 69 to 30 BC. She's known mainly for her love interests, of course, her two mans, Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. And to this day, we're still trying to uncover more dazzling details of the lost queen. Now, she ruled alongside her young brother, and her life was much more than being just beautiful, which is what everyone seems to focus on more than anything. Both children were assigned to the throne, Cleopatra being 18 and little bro being 10 years old. So Cleopatra, being a little older, therefore a little wiser, became the ruler. A couple of years passed, and eventually Cleopatra was pushed out of Alexandria over her greed for power, classic, but her little brother, equally a co-ruler, had her driven out. He was jealous, and honestly, I'm the youngest in my family, I kinda get it. But Cleopatra wasn't quite done yet. She had a few tricks up her sleeve. Believing she was the goddess Isis reborn, this beautiful goddess, Cleopatra made these dazzling entrances whenever she could. Most notably in 48 BC, right when Caesar arrived in Alexandria during that family feud with Ptolemy VIII. She wanted to meet the Roman general, but she couldn't be seen because there was a little bit of family beef, so she had herself wrapped up in a linen sack and then personally delivered to Caesar's bedroom. Hashtag your order has arrived. Surprise. Now, she won the heart of Rome's future dictator here, obviously, and eventually she regained Egypt's throne. Her brother wasn't too fond of this alliance, and in the following battle, he drowned in the Nile River, resulting in Cleopatra's return to power. Number 10. King Edward VIII. Directly after his father died in 1936, King Edward VIII took the throne, right? That's pretty normal. But the tides quickly turned when, less than a year later, he renounced his position. Now, this was of course a huge scandal right off the bat. This is not something that's taken lightly in the royal family. Turns out the woman responsible for stealing his heart was that of Wallis Simpson, America's socialite who had already been divorced once before and was at this point working through her second divorce. So you can only imagine how everybody reacted at that point, right? Oh, how dare she? His proposal to Simpson, of course, caused social and political backlash. The Church of England wasn't so chill with Edward marrying someone who had already been divorced. Yeah, they're not really okay with that. So Edward was forced to abdicate. Yeah, he had to, right, for love. Edward and Simpson then tied the knot in 1937, and they stayed together until Edward's death much later in 1972. Sliding into royal DMs right off the hop. Okay, we're in for a treat. Number 9, dark predictions. Of course, in recent years, the royal family has seen a change that many didn't really expect. When Harry and Meghan chose to renounce their royalty status, speculation began that this could be the beginning of the end for the monarchy. People only fueled their fire with questions, and also, somebody may have called it. Yeah, Nostradamus, he may have predicted this entire event. One of his predictions literally reads, "At the end of the war, the great powers change. Near the coast are born 3 beautiful children. They will ruin the town when they come of age, they will change the kingdom, and they will not see it grow anymore." Now, Harry is only one of 2 children, so I'm not sure if the, quote was talking about him and his siblings, or if it has more to do so with some other royal family members, but either way, there's some people who take Nostradamus' words very, very seriously out there, so I had to include it. Maybe there's something there, I don't know, maybe there's something we haven't quite breaking down yet. That's why we need National Treasure 3, maybe this is the plot. Number 8, King Henry II. While we're on the topic of him, could Nostradamus have actually predicted the death of King Henry II? Because if he did, that's pretty curious, I'd say. Never used the word curious in my life, but I'm like, you know what, that's curious. King Henry II was actually a personal acquaintance of the prophet himself. That'd be kind of cool, being friends with Nostradamus. I'd be like, hey, how does Game of Thrones end? Please. While at one point in history, Nostradamus was seen addressing King Henry II as the most invincible King Henry of France, unfortunately, Henry proved to be quite vincible when he met his gruesome death, might I add, at age 40. Yeah, in the summer of 1559, not a great time. A terrible jousting accident went wrong and it left the king passing away shortly after from sepsis. This is a terrible story, but I have to explain because, it's history and, well, that's what we're here for. The jousting accident saw the king having splinters driven into his eye and then his skull as well by one of his young soldiers. And the Nostradamus quote reads, "The young lion will overcome the older one. It says he will pierce his eyes through a golden cage." okay, already we're a little bit spooky. And that 2 wounds will ensure a cruel death. So I'm not saying he predicted it, I'm just saying, kind of nailed it. Number 7, a fateful turn of events. Queen Victoria, her reign began back in 1837 and it lasted until the Queen's death in 1901. Now at just age 18, Alexandrina Victoria had to rise up to the throne. Had to, right? All these cases, it's like, yeah, they have to do this. She was born, of course, on May 24th, 1819, and Queen Victoria was actually 5th in line when she was born, nowhere near the throne. So right off the bat, it was actually highly unlikely that she would ever see the crown. But one by one, all of her family members began passing away fast. In 4 years, 3 of Victoria's cousins passed away, and then her father and her grandfather both died 1 week apart from one another. So on one hand, obviously it's sad, it's tragic, everyone's dealing with loss so fast. But on the other hand, by the time 1830 rolled around, Victoria was only 11 years old, and already she was next up to bat for the throne at 11. Imagine, that's like some ancient Egypt. Number 6, the Great Irish Famine. The Great Irish Famine took out many people. Back in 1845, potato crop that a lot of the Irish population relied on were suddenly no longer available. See, a group of microorganisms wiped them out, and in result, around 1 million folks died or had to leave. Now, it was draconian law and British ruling at this point that made the exported food hard to reach people. That's where things stopped. This famine led to Irish independence, of course, and anti-union movements. And the show Victoria pulled back 0 punches in 2017, where an episode showed the true happenings behind the Great Irish Famine and the role that Queen Victoria played in coming to the aid of her then subjects. It was the death of at least 1 million people. This was a very dark 7 years in Irish history. Historian Christine Keneally spoke out and says, quote, "There is no evidence that she had any real compassion for the Irish people in any way." Yikes. That's a historian saying that. That's how you know. Number 5, Charlotte Augusta. Princess Charlotte Augusta of Wales lost her life in 1817, and when I say ancient, this is probably the most recent that I'll go, because I know ancient means way back. I gotcha. But I have to include this one, because as far as royals go, she was loved at this time. She ended up falling in love with Britain's Prince Leopold, but a year and a half later, she died giving birth. She was healthy at the time. She was only 21 years old when this happened. Charlotte was lined up to be the queen one day, and historical accounts say that the doctors here were at fault. Charlotte's tragic passing had vendors running out of black fabric. That's how rocked the public was right after this. Just massive displays of grief. What do you guys think? Comment down below. Was this a doctor conspiracy or just classic medieval times? It's the olden days. We can't really do as much. Let us know. Number 4, Catherine Howard. Queen of England from 1540 to 1541. Such a short amount of time, but why? Being the 5th wife of King Henry VIII, cousin to Anne Boleyn, referred to by King Henry as his rose without a thorn, he just gave her all the gifts and she was just 19 years old. Sounds great so far, but you know, because of his list, things won't end up well. Their marriage didn't even last a year until rumors, not letters or eyewitnesses, rumors started spreading about infidelity. There was a small amount of evidence that suggested that she had been romantically involved with somebody beforehand, so a jealous mad king got jealous and mad again. Shocker. You had me at 5th wife, I don't know. She was executed for adultery and treason at the Tower Green on February 13th, 1542. Number 3, Catherine Parr. When Catherine Parr got a position in Princess Mary's house in 1542, she met King Henry VIII. She was smart, she was 30 years old, so it was a step in the right direction age-wise when it comes to these queens and King Henry. Not that there's anything wrong with marrying somebody younger, that's not what I'm saying, but it's just, well, look at this list. All these people died, spoiler alert, so the older the better at least. I don't know. She was seen as somebody who could nurse the king in his dying age, so the public liked her. She was the first English queen also to write and publish her own books. Now, come 1543, Catherine gave up her man, Thomas Seymour, to marry the king. The two got married that July at Hampton Court Palace, and from that point on, her beliefs were deemed dangerous. Queen Catherine was a supporter of the English Reformation, and Catherine's religious opponents were plotting against her, and they tried to convince the king that she was dangerous. Her arrest was even planned, everything was kind of going in a bad direction, and then Catherine went to King Henry right away and then asked for forgiveness herself. You know, for pushing her views too far many times before, and he forgave her. Meanwhile, others are losing heads for having relationships. Okay. Her and Henry were married for 5 years, and then after his death, she married Thomas Seymour just a few months later. And then come September 1548, she died after giving birth to her daughter. The account of her death comes from a lady-in-waiting and friend of Catherine Parr, comes from Elizabeth Tyrrett, only her account is fishy because she never liked Thomas Seymour to begin with. She made it seem like Catherine was speaking about her husband in a negative manner when she was dying, and this is the only time in history where that's ever been an idea. So what do you think? It's like Broken Telephone, but hundreds of years ago. I'm like, maybe she was friends? I don't know. Sounds like a conspiracy. Number 2, Anne of Cleves. Where to even begin here? Okay, this one is sad, man. Anne was right in the middle of Henry's wives. She was married to King Henry for 6 months, and it was seen as quite strategic in a way. Henry's chief minister convinced him to marry one of the sisters of Germany's Duke of Cleves, either Anne or Amelia. So in order to decide, Henry requested that Hans Holbein travel to Cleves to paint a portrait of each sister. This is like the birth of Tinder right now. I'm not joking, this actually happened. This man compared portraits and then chose Anne because every man praiseth her beauty. She was compared to the silver moon. Yeah, try that on a dating site. I praiseth thou beauty, madam. Super swipe. A treaty was signed, and a few weeks later Anne arrived to England. Henry was beyond upset because she looked nothing like she did in her portrait. Yep, real life, this is what really happened. He tried to stop the wedding because of this, but it was too late. They had to follow through, and they got married on January 6, 1540. Anne later accepted the divorce because obviously a divorce was in play after what you just heard, and then she lived as the king's sister peacefully until her death in 1557. Of all the ways to be remembered in history, King Henry made this horrible for Anne. And finally, number 1, Cleopatra. Last of the Egyptian pharaohs and last on our list. One of the biggest questions to this day is just how Cleopatra died. What happened? It's been rumored for a while that a snake bite was the culprit, but many believe that Cleopatra also allowed a poisonous snake to end her life. They think it was a bite from an asp. But there's also a large amount of historians that also believe that she poisoned herself using a hairpin. Her lover Antony fell on his own sword, but Cleopatra, she just poked herself. She barely lost blood. Now as a youngin', we have to note that Cleopatra was brilliant. She was also interested in learning specifically about chemistry. So this theory about her poisoning herself doesn't sound very far-fetched. Until we find her body, we'll really never know. What do you guys think?
Number 10, King Midas. Most people know the story of King Midas, but in a nutshell, he was a king who was granted the power of that everything he touched turned to solid gold. So, no, he didn't exactly buy anything with that kind of power, but the man can have anything he wants or buy anything he wants. It's a lot of gold. This sounds great, but it's really awful for a couple of reasons. One, that is pretty much the moral of the story, and the other is, well, some basic economy stuff. The first reason this would suck is that 1, you should never be too greedy, and you really shouldn't. And you should always be careful what you wish for. This blessing quickly turned into a curse as Midas could no longer eat. Which, that's bad. Not eating and everything you touch turned to gold. Ugh, you couldn't hug anybody, it's terrible. The other issue would be his wealth. You'd have to be very careful on how many items you actually touched, as producing too much gold would eventually devalue the price of gold. Especially if you touch a bed or something, that's a lot of gold. Imagine how much a solid gold bed would weigh, how much that would be worth. So in reality, you would be both starving and poor. Number 9, Mansa Musa. Sort of related to the King Midas issue, Mansa Musa was probably the richest man to ever walk the face of the earth. A king from northern Africa who exploited his country's salt and gold reserves. His estimated wealth today would be around the $400 billion mark. $400 billion US. Ooh, that's a lot of money. Tough to actually measure it exactly because it was from so long ago, but it could be less, and some say it could actually even be more. Mansa Musa went on tour one year to see all the beautiful things he could of the ancient world, and you can't take a little vacation without buying something at the gift shop. Mansa Musa was so rich and spent so much money in a few towns that he visited that he single-handedly upset the economy of those cities. Elon Musk wishes he could. So he basically bought a lot of stuff, and it was unusual because it upset the economy. Like, he destroyed the economy of those towns. That's insane. Number 8, Michael Jackson, the king of pop. Ah, see, I got you. I pulled a sneaky on you. But yeah, he's still a king. And maybe he was the biggest celebrity who ever lived. Would Halloween really be Halloween without Thriller? And how could cool guys let you know they were cool in the 80s if they didn't have all that leather jacket and stuff? You wouldn't be able to know. You just wouldn't. Well, maybe some things you don't know about Michael Jackson were his shopping habits. The man loved shopping. And with that kind of money, well, you can do anything. Well, some may remember his chimp, his Neverland mansion complete with carnival rides, an arcade, and even an oxygen chamber in case Darth Vader was coming over to stay the night. However, something very strange the man tried to do was he tried to buy a very strange man himself, or rather his bones. For some reason, Michael had a fascination with the Elephant Man, a man with severe facial deformities and freak show performer from the late 1800s. Michael tried to purchase his remains. That's it. That's the point. He tried to buy him. They wouldn't let him, but he tried. That's a weird thing to buy. Whenever I hit the number, I don't go, hey, 1-800 museum people, someone bring me King Tut. I want it. Number 7, Elvis Presley. Lots of similarities today. Elvis Presley, before Michael Jackson, he was probably the most famous person to ever exist. The king of rock and roll, baby, that's right. All I'll say is phone your grandma and ask her how she feels about him. She probably says she loves his music and those gyrating hips. At the time, it was pretty controversial. Boy, only if they knew what was going on today. Whew. Sorry 50s atomic families. Well, being that Elvis Presley was the king and the first celebrity to be idolized the way we do with modern celebrities, he became quite wealthy. Well, with all that money, he bought some weird things, including a chimp. Everyone's buying a monkey, they want a zoo, I don't know. A mansion property he named Graceland, a pink Cadillac for his mother, and strangely enough, he bought FDR's yacht. Yeah, what? That's so weird. Good president, sure, but does it really have room for a monkey in a pink Cadillac? I don't know. Number 6, French royalty. This one is more about Marie Antoinette and King Louis XVI. It's kind of like a two-pack, kind of like a couple, but trust me, it all makes sense in the end. Again, anything they bought, it was probably the king's wallet, wasn't it? Okay, so when your country is starving, demanding more rights, and in general, life really sucks, what's the next best thing you do? Buy a $12 million necklace. Yeah, right, okay, I've said that before, sure. Okay, Chad, what else? Continue to live your opulent life on the king's and people's dimes. Sure, why not? It makes sense, okay. I'm talking too much. Well, something I learned today, and something that Taylor showed me, is that I guess the last Queen of France was a little lonely, so what did King Louis do to fix this? Spend more time with her? Nay. Buy her a new dog? Nay, sir and madams. He had her pug from Austria imported to the country. And anyone can tell you that when something is imported, you are going to be dishing out a few more dosh. Yes, that's right. They imported her pug from Austria. Imagine how that sounds when your house is literally falling apart, you're starving, and you pay the most taxes. Makes you want to put heads on pikes. That's what it makes you want to do. Can you imagine that? We're all poor and hungry. She's like, well, look at my dog. It's my dog. They're French, they don't sound like that, but this is my dog, look at my dog, here he is.
In our number 5 spot today, we have Caterina de' Medici. Caterina was an Italian noblewoman born into a famous family. She was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559, with marriage to King Henry II, and she was the mother of 4 future French kings. It wasn't exactly surprising news that her husband, Henry II, had a lifelong affair with a mistress, but on his deathbed, when he was begging to see his mistress, Caterina refused and left him to die a lonely and painful death. Do I entirely blame her? No, but it's also a pretty heartless move, you know what I mean? The daughter of the queen, Margaret, was said to be rebellious, but her mother wasn't just going to let her get away with it. The mother and daughter would fight over the married daughter's extramarital affairs, and it is said that Caterina's scream could be heard echoing throughout the palace. One fight between the two even saw her locking her daughter up in a castle, never to see her again. In our number 4 spot today, we have Agrippina the Younger. Roman Empress Julia Agrippina of Rome was pretty spoiled. She lived a lavish life. Her husband was the emperor and she had a family, but that just wasn't enough for her and she wanted it all. Julia was quite ambitious and she spent most of her early life trying to dethrone her predecessors. She believed that she and her son had a claim to the Roman throne by birthright, so she tricked her way into royalty by tricking her uncle Claudius into changing the Roman law so that they could get married. Suddenly though, after they got married and she became empress, Claudius died. Could be a really convenient coincidence, or it could have been a totally planned hit. I'm not accusing anyone, I'm just telling you what the word on the street is. She and her son Nero went on to rule Rome from 49 to 54 CE. Julia stayed by her son's side for as long as she could so that she could hold on to her power, but eventually Nero got tired of his mother manipulating him and he had to force her out of power. Julia, as you could imagine, was furious because power was the one thing in the world she desired the most, and so she rallied a group of supporters to try and overthrow him, but the plans backfired and she was expelled instead. In our number 3 spot today we have Maria Eleonora. Maria of Brandenburg, the Queen of Sweden, has quite a horrifying story that relates to the birth of her daughter. Apparently, Maria wasn't feeling the overwhelming joy of childbirth because although she was hoping for a son, she gave birth to a daughter, Queen Christina. Maria wasn't shy about her opinion. She apparently screamed that she was given a dark and ugly daughter with black eyes. Okay, it's kinda rude. She referred to her new child as a monster and apparently just absolutely did not want anything to do with Christina and would have rathered that she just didn't exist. Apparently she even placed Christina to sleep next to the corpse of her father who had passed away. It's like a different kind of messed up. Things clearly weren't right with Maria. In our number 2 spot today we have Queen Isabella. Isabella co-ruled Spain from 1451 to 1504 with King Ferdinand II, and during her reign she had some pretty horrific views and feelings. She wanted to get rid of all Spanish Muslims and Jewish people from her kingdom. Sounds a bit like another evil ruler from history. In 1492 she ordered that all Jewish people either convert to Catholicism or get thrown out of the kingdom. She made them all come to Spanish court to either pledge their faith to Catholicism or get exiled from Spain. How horrible is that? The Queen has also been attributed with establishing the Spanish Inquisition, which definitely is not a historical highlight. Both Isabella and Ferdinand are often said to have done great things for Spain, which in some cases is true, but at what cost and for what reason? In our number 1 spot today we have Ranavalona I. The last queen of Madagascar, she ruled the kingdom for 33 years from 1828 until 1861. There is no doubt that she was committed to her kingdom and that she would do anything for it, but in this plight she was cruel and violent. She initially came to power after the death of her husband, and once she had it, she was not letting it go. The queen was able to keep away the advances of the French and British, and she left the bodies of those who tried to attack out for display on the beach. In 1845 the queen ordered 50,000 subjects to build roads across the jungle for 4 months. They were meant to have this massive buffalo hunt. Well, she clearly wasn't thinking everything through because 10,000 of those poor souls died of starvation and exhaustion, and not one buffalo was hunted. Some records of history state that she even had her own uncle executed in order to protect her power, and there is an even more gruesome story. Some people even state that she ended her own mother's life by starving her to death. That is some epic level of evil, if it's true.
At number 10, kleptomania. If you were a queen, then you would think that you had enough money to just buy whatever your little heart desired. Though that may be true, there was at least one famous queen who just straight up stole things just because she could. Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth's grandmother, was quite the kleptomaniac, and no matter how hard people tried to avoid having their things stolen by her, it just never worked. When the queen would visit someone's house, she would walk around looking at whatever knickknacks you had lying around, and when she found something that she liked, she would stand there and just sigh super loudly to get someone's attention. Much like how my dog used to sigh dramatically when he wanted food. Anyways, usually when someone heard the sigh, they knew that this was a sign that the queen wanted whatever she was gazing upon. Sometimes the homeowner would just give whatever it was to the queen as a gift. But if it was something that they weren't willing to part with, then she would either try to buy it off them or just straight up take it when no one was looking. This became such a big problem that people started hiding their prized possessions before hosting the queen in their home, but she eventually caught on to this strategy, so she just started showing up uninvited. She could not rest until she owned pretty much everything in the kingdom.
Number 9. No time to dine. If I'm eating, don't acknowledge me as a human being. I sound like a pug when I eat, okay? I don't waste any time. I love food, okay? It's business. Now, if you're a queen and you eat fast, well, everybody else has to eat fast as well. This began back in Queen Victoria's time. The queen loved to feast and she didn't waste anytime at all. Like, it's really fast. The way the royal family works is that when the queen is done that course or that meal, you're also done. So when Queen Victoria would smash an entire 7-course meal in 30 minutes, which apparently she could do easily, you'd be blowing on your soup still and Queen Victoria would already be telling everybody to pack it up. That's stressful. All because she could eat lots of food in a short amount of time. Also, once the queen gave a toast, you couldn't even speak. Also, once the queen placed her cutlery on the table, regardless of where you were during that course, everybody's plate would then be taken away at the same time. And the next one would then come in. I would just put my food in my pockets, you know, screw it. It's almost like when you go to all you can eat sushi and you have like some sushi left over, you don't want to waste it. You're like, you know what? I'm not paying that bill.
At number 8, cross-dressing. Empress Elizabeth was quite the character, I guess you could say. Since she was a monarch, she could do whatever she wanted, and that is exactly what she did. You see, she was quite into fashion, more specifically men's fashion. The Empress believed that she just had legs for days, like Naomi Campbell, and she wanted to show them off to the world, but the only problem with that was the fact that back then, pants were reserved for men, and so since she wore dresses all the time, no one got to see her godly legs. Well, to combat that, Elizabeth came up with a solution. She was known to hold huge parties where everyone had to cross-dress. She only did this so that it would give her an excuse to wear pants. And I mean, she could have if she just wanted to wear them on a regular day, but she didn't want to be the only woman in men's clothing, so she made everyone else dress up too. At these parties, no one looked good or really enjoyed themselves for that matter. Women complained that the men's clothing they wore to these parties were unflattering, and the men were just all over the place because they didn't know how to maneuver a hoop skirt. The only person really having a fun time was Empress Elizabeth, but I guess that was really the whole point.
Number 7, check on the dead. Funerals are pretty expensive, especially a royal one at that. It takes a lot of power to dig up and then carry these massive caskets around, which back in the day was even more exhausting. Joanna of Castile was born in 1479. Her marriage to the Duke of Austria was arranged, but she was very much in love, maybe a bit too much. Hear me out. When her husband met his fate in 1506 due to typhoid fever, Joanna would have his tomb unearthed and then opened over and over again, just so she can make sure that he was still there. Now, of course, I feel bad for the queen here. She was clearly not coping with his death well, but to have his tomb or casket or coffin, whatever you want to call it, to have it opened and closed over and over and then dug up and then put back in the ground, she would make people carry his body around everywhere she went. That's heavy. That is so much work, even keeping it under her bed sometimes. Ugh, I got goosebumps just saying that. That's pretty creepy. Ashes, I could understand. That's like a one-man job to carry that around. But a 1,000-pound royal coffin? They have to carry 30 city blocks? My back already hurts thinking of that. No thank you. I quit.
At number 6, deadly affairs. Dating is hard. If you've ever been on dating apps like Tinder or Bumble, then you know that things aren't as easy as it may seem when it comes to finding someone that you remotely like. Maybe we should take a page out of Queen Nzinga's book when it comes to dating, because it seemed like she had fun with her escapades. Well, maybe don't actually do what she did because it's actually pretty gruesome, but you get what I'm saying. Queen Nzinga from what is now modern-day Angola was a busy woman. After taking over the throne from her brother, she juggled the monarchy, wars with the Portuguese, and having a love life. The queen pulled together a harem of only the most attractive men, but because she was such a busy person, she didn't really have the time to walk into a room and choose who she was going to sleep with that night, so she came up with an alternative solution. Nzinga would have 2 members of her harem fight each other to the death every night, and whoever won got to sleep with the queen. Solid plan, right? Well, the winner wasn't really all that lucky for too long, because she would have the winner executed the following day.
Number 5, Empress Irene. Mother dearest. Most people have fond memories of their mothers. Maybe you should call her. I'm just saying, Mother's Day happened, you should call her. Empress Irene was a woman who wanted power. Honestly, who doesn't? We've all got a little bit of Sith in us. Yes. Her son, who had naturally inherited some of her power, was growing stronger by the day. Now, maybe it was ego, maybe it was envy, maybe her son just took down her live, laugh, love signs. I'm not sure. But Irene was not having any of it. So, when her son least expected it, she had 2 guards apprehend him and had his eyes gouged out. Now, being that this was before 2022, this was a critical medical injury, and after 9 days of grueling pain, and when I'm sure it was a lot of blind confusion, the injury proved to be fatal. So what's the lesson here? Blood is not as thick as water? I don't really know, it's just messed up. Number 4, Queen of Castile. Life can be tough sometimes, especially when we lose the ones we love the most. Everybody deals with things differently. The Queen of Castile is a person who deals with that, well, very differently. People passing on was no rare occurrence back in those days. There's 1,000 reasons on how you could wind up 6 feet under. When the Queen of Castile's husband passed away from the disease of the month, she was devastated. Rightfully so, that's rough. However, that being said, sometimes you gotta take that with a little grace. For days she would not leave her husband's side, even after he was a cold cadaver. Later on, that corpse would travel with her, apparently even stopping a carriage once to get out and kiss his feet. It's Weekend at Bernie's, except a lot sadder and gross. And not a charming 80s movie. Ugh. Number 3, Carlotta of Mexico. This is a new one for me, but an interesting story nonetheless. Basically, France wanted a piece of Mexico, and I mean, come on, who doesn't? It's gorgeous. Carlotta was a Belgian princess who kinda just married into the royal family and got plopped down in some chaos in Mexico. There was a war, enough political strife to make anyone involved in the Watergate scandal start to look for documents. It was messy, it wasn't a good time. It got so bad that she had to go back to Europe and basically made the call that all university students have to make after Frosh Week. Hey mom, dad, listen, yeah, I'm great. Do you think maybe you could send me some money? Yeah, I need some help. Except her phone call wasn't like that. Her phone call was more like, hey, European nobility, can you come please save my husband because he's about to get de-lifed and like stabilize the country? Thanks. Spoiled princess calling. Hi. It didn't work out in the end. He got de-lifed, she went back home, and well, she went a little crazy. Number 2, Elizabeth Bathory. Serial de-lifers, your queen has arrived. I think this one is one of the more interesting cases in history. Usually when you think of a creepy de-lifer that lurk in the night, you think of Gacy, Dahmer, you know, guys like that. It's not very often that it's a woman and or someone from before the 19th or 20th century. That's just how it goes. I'd also argue perishing and manual de-lifing was a part of life back in medieval times, so kind of hard to quantify what is and isn't a serial de-lifer or life taker. However, I think she counts. The body count is estimated to be somewhere in the hundreds, and a most peculiar rumor is that she bathed in the blood of her victims. Ooh, that's gross. Bathing in water. That checks out. Bathing in mud. You go to a spa. That checks out too. Bathing in beer. Sticky and strange, but check. I've done it. One time I did that. Bathing in blood. That's a no calzone for me, chief. While the bathing in blood thing might be false, the evidence of her crimes were not. Imagine being so spoiled you can hide bodies. Number 1, Queen Mary. Henry VIII was a big bad dude who wanted it his way. He wasn't the Burger King, although by looking at him you could tell he was packing a few of those bad boys away too. No, he was the King of England and he had many wives and was spoiled himself. So, do you think his children grew up humble and wise? Nay, kind sir and madam. Queen Mary took the throne a few years later and wasn't happy with the Protestants. Ugh, too many, she said to herself. Well, if you've heard us talk about her before, she'll probably come up again time and time again because, well, she cooked those people on a wooden stake. Over her reign, countless people felt the fires of her wrath, hence the name Bloody Mary.
Kicking off the list at number 10, the Empress of Austria. The saying wrong place at the wrong time couldn't be used more in this case. Empress Elizabeth of Austria, she was sadly taken out by somebody who just wanted to attack a royal. He didn't have anything against Elizabeth per se, this man was an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini, and that fateful day, September 10th, 1898, he took the Empress's life. In his own admission, Luigi stated that he had nothing against the Empress on a personal level at all. See, what had happened was he intended on taking the life of the Duke of Orleans, but when Luigi arrived a little too late in Geneva, the opportunity to do so had passed. He looked at a local newspaper, saw Elizabeth, and found out where she was staying, and he waited for her to leave that hotel. That's how easy it was. People are so creepy. Keep an eye open. If you're a queen, keep your eyes open. This is scary. Number 9. Royal curse. The remains of Polish queens and kings were discovered back in April 1931 in a crypt in Vilnius. Polish researchers didn't even know what they were in for. I mean, a storm had flooded a cathedral and they threw down sandbags to preserve the area, but on the night of April 25th, they had followed the water into this lost chamber that held the remains of Polish kings and queens. These remains, with the crowns still attached, might I add, were from the 15th century. What a find, right? Well, sadly the remains were all over this flooded tomb now. It wasn't really in one spot. It was horrible. And now after these discoveries, that's when things got really mysterious. Those involved in the findings began to die off in unusual circumstances, one after another. And it happened pretty quick too. One professor had died after falling down a shaft in his apartment. He had a heart attack. An engineer had died before him as well due to undisclosed medical issues. Okay. Another professor years later who worked in the crypt as well became paralyzed at age 62. A sculptor involved died when untying his shoelace. Just the weirdest way to go out. That's the only details that we know. Just, I don't know, use your imagination I guess. Maybe he fell and hit his head. That's sad, it's tragic. And another professor died in 1936 shortly after visiting the crypt as well. I sure hope this isn't an ancient curse because these guys were trying to preserve their history and avoid the crypt from flooding. Like, I don't know, we need a Ouija board to clear this whole thing up. We were trying to help you with the sandbags. Number 8, Queen Caroline. In a list of unusual ways that people have died, odds are it's going to get a little gruesome, a little messy. After all, that's why you clicked this video, right? Right? Some ancient queens die natural causes and then history remembers them for their reign. In this case, history remembers Queen Caroline for the way that she died. It was written in an epigram from the 18th century from a poet named Alexander Pope. He wrote down, "Here lies wrapped up in 40,000 towels, the only proof that Caroline had bowels." It rhymes? Like, come on man, you didn't have to do this. This is horrible. That's like a prank almost. I can't believe somebody was like, yeah, write that down, that's good, that's good. Did it rhyme? Yeah, she'd like that for sure, R.I.P. Number 7, Anne Boleyn. The second wife of King Henry VIII, yes, we have a few on this list. She was found guilty of treason and she had been charged with having sexual relationships with 5 others, including Lord Rochford, aka her brother, George Boleyn. Yeah, the ancient days were a little bit odd. She had also apparently had relations with Sir Henry Norris, the king's close friend. And when I say close friend, I mean he was the groom of the stool, so they were tight. He literally would wipe his. So on top of this, Anne was also found guilty of conspiring to kill her husband. Now it's since been proven that these crimes were a bunch of rubbish basically. Anne wasn't even present when these events went down. She was still recovering from the birth of her daughter, future Elizabeth I, so there's no way in hell she was fooling around with the groom of the stool in October 1533. All 5 guys involved were executed on Tower Hill in May 1536, and then 2 days later, Anne joked about her little neck before being taken out with a sword as well. There wasn't even a coffin for her burial. Somebody had to go and get an old elm chest from the Tower Armory. They used a chest to bury her body near her brother, Lord Rochford. A chest. Horrible. That's so horrible. Number 6, Mary Queen of Scots. If you're a murderino, this one's pretty juicy. Listen up. Back in 1565, Mary was determined to take the throne for herself. When Mary was just 6 days old, her father, King James V, had passed away, so she ascended to the throne. She was about to marry the King of France in 1558, but he passed away, so she returned to Scotland as the country's monarch. Her next plan was to marry her cousin, Lord Darnley, so now if something were to happen to Elizabeth, Mary would be yet again lined up for the throne. That cousin ended up dying in a random explosion, and then years later, in 1568, Queen Elizabeth had welcomed Mary after she fled to England. So Mary was close, but now what? Well, Elizabeth had found out that Mary was involved in English Catholic and Spanish plots to overthrow her, so she was then placed on house arrest. Fair, more than fair, more than fair. Cut to 19 years later, 1586, a letter had emerged revealing that Mary was involved in a plot to have her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I, killed. She was then sentenced to death and her head was taken off for treason. History is dark, my friends. Even if you're family, shit gets crazy.
Number 5, nothing left. Alexander the Great was an excellent warrior for his time. Having conquered so much at a young age is really quite impressive. His empire stretched from Greece all the way to India. For a history class or a good book, this is fine, but in reality, he was a conqueror. The places he was marching into weren't exactly happy to have spear-wielding visitors. He laid siege on multiple cities, executed those who defied him, and sold people into YouTube's least favorite S-word. Just about checks off everything a guy needs to be considered a tyrant. History remembers his conquest, but I for sure will not forget how brutal conquerors can really be. Number 4. Chop chop. While Maximilien Robespierre was not a king in the monarch sense, he did hold a lot of political power in France when the political climate was quite messy. Plus, France was at war. But even messier than that is the way he dealt with citizens who were deemed anti-revolution, by sending them to the guillotine. Within a 1-year period, he sent 17,000 people to their dooms via the National Razor, or as it became to be known. He even began practicing deism, something he called the cult of the Supreme Being. And if you know your history, you know that you can't get away with that forever. And with some sweet poetic justice, Robespierre was sentenced to the guillotine. Number 3. All my friends are dead. Usually when people expire, the human thing to do is bury said lifeless human. It's just what we do. But apparently Ferdinand I of Naples did not get that memo, instead taking a page from Night at the Museum. No, this is not a cute comedy movie starring Ben Stiller, but in reality a complete horrifying nightmare. Ferdinand took the saying, "keep your enemies close," a little too literally, as his favorite form of punishment was to mummify his enemies, which, let's face it, if he's a king, there's gonna be plenty. And he would like to display these mummies in what's probably the coolest place to be if you're into that weird goth stuff. He did keep some alive in the dungeon, but he much preferred his guests embalmed, where he would have them dressed up on display, just as they were before making the mistake of crossing Ferdinand. Now, what's the point of having that hardcore collection if you're not going to show it off? Well, he did. To the people he suspected of treason, which in a place like that, treason leaves your mind pretty quick. Number 2. Average height for the time. Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the greatest military strategists of his time, maybe of all time. With full support of the French army, Napoleon found himself earning gallant victories one after another, all being accomplished at a very young age. However, after years of great success in multiple wars and kicking a lot of imperial butt, it started to go to his head. Shortly after the coup that overthrew Robespierre, Napoleon had gained enough support to claim himself as the Emperor of France. With said power, dissolved the freedom of press, reduced the rights of women, and oh yeah, he was at war with most of Europe for years to come. While his military victories cannot be understated, his rise as a tyrannical dictator makes him very unholy. Number 1. Dracula. There's been a lot of unholy things said here today, but old Vladdy takes the cake. What he lacked in land and power, he made up for in his brutality. As the legends go, Vlad was creative in his punishments, and was well noted for his human art pieces. And by art, I mean impaling his enemy on pikes, sometimes through their rear ends, and leaving them as warnings for anyone who dared cross him. Similar to the time visiting envoys wouldn't remove their hats as it is to do in tradition, so Vlad had their hats nailed to their skulls, so that they may never remove them. There are a few other stories that are just too hot for YouTube, but I think he's a textbook example of unholy. He may also be the inspiration for Dracula. Imagine being that much of a monster one is created in your likeness. I mean, just looking at the painting of this guy creeps me out, man. Whoa!